Chapter 394. Emperor Li was watching Li Yunxin coldly. He seemed to have heard Emperor Yi mention it before. In fact, he did mention it. But Emperor Yi didn't remember it clearly, and didn't say it clearly. Now that he saw Li Yunxin, he knew it was that person. He frowned slightly. "You are Li Yunxin. I heard you have some tricks, but you are timid. That day, my brother risked his life to protect your people in the city of Wei. I heard you hid in some inhibition." Humph. Emperor Yi was about to say something, but General Honghua was already impatient. She watched the development of the situation coldly, and now understood the reason. It turned out that there was a demon mixed in with the Qing army, and seemed to want to hide his tracks. As for the demon's name, she seemed to have heard of it before, but she also didn't know much about it. She only heard her king mention that there was a demon king called Li Yunxin. He was in the Guanyuan crypt discussing with them, and was attacked by them. After that, she didn't mention him anymore. It was probably because of the current situation. He was attacked by the crowd in the Guanyuan crypt, so he escaped. So he mixed in with the army of mortals in the mountains and hid himself. Oh, this was a meritorious deed. Now she knew the whereabouts of the demon king. Her king Yujun was going to arrive soon. Didn't she avenge herself and help her king catch the fugitive? Thinking of this, she suddenly laughed. Standing on the head of the huge beast, she pointed at Emperor Li. "You ungrateful thing. What are you doing here? When you became a ghost emperor, you were indeed a scary big demon. Unfortunately, you were injured by those old things in the Daotong Kenzo. Now, you are only in the real state. But since you are a demon, and have no grudge against my king, as long as you don't cause trouble today, we won't make things difficult for you." Then she pointed at Li Yunxin. "This swordsman is useless. So the one who injured me was you. Oh, Li Yunxin, I've heard about you from my king. Did you escape from the Guanyuan crypt as a sinner? If you meet this general, you won't be able to escape. My great king will be here soon. This area is also surrounded by thousands of demon soldiers under my great king. Today, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings." Hearing this, Kong Tongzi laughed again and shouted, That's right. I just want to see you demons fight amongst yourselves. It's best if all of you die. I didn't lose my life in vain." One cultivator and one monster quarreled. Emperor Yi frowned and shifted his gaze onto Kong Tongzi. He looked at him and said to Emperor Li, "Brother, you have misunderstood him. We'll talk about it later." Then he looked at Li Yunxin and asked, "Where did this swordsman come from?" Li Yunxin turned around slightly and glanced at Kong Tongzi. Nothing special, just a small fish. Previously, he had wanted to borrow him to infiltrate Kenzo. "Now that I've met you, it's useless." Kong Tongzi sneered. He straightened his body and shouted, "Hee. I, Kong Tongzi, started cultivating at the age of 12. I've only cultivated for 33 years. My cultivation isn't as good as you demons who have cultivated for hundreds or thousands of years. In your eyes, I'm just a small fish. But my Wujin sword sect master, Jing Guangzi, has a higher cultivation than you. Today you're complacent with these demons. A few days ago, you were like a stray dog being chased by my sect master. Now that the war between Xianmen and demons is about to start, if I die today, I'll just die 10 days earlier. I will wait for you in Sunluo Temple. Let's see what you look like then. Do it." After saying this, he frowned and closed his eyes. He just had to wait for the demon's ferocious nature to be provoked by him, and raise his hand to kill him. But then, he heard Li Yunxin exclaim, "Oh, so your sect master Jing Guangzi didn't tell you what happened that day." After saying this, he laughed again. Good. That's easy. Come on, open your eyes and see what this is." The demon Li Yunxin finally stopped ignoring him, and was willing to talk to him. This made Kong Tongzi feel a strange sense of relief. Then he didn't know why, but he actually opened his eyes and looked at what Li Yunxin said. When he looked, he saw that Li Yunxin was holding a ball of golden light in his hand. Kong Tongzi's eyes widened, and he couldn't say a word for a long time. Although he was a low-level cultivator, as a disciple of Wujin sword sect, he knew what his sect master's natal magic weapon was. The golden thing in Li Yunxin's hand. If it wasn't the glazed sword heart, what else could it be? How did it fall into his hand? His throat gurgled. and after a while he exclaimed, How? How could it be with you? What kind of trick is this? Li Yunxin snorted and laughed. So your sect master didn't tell you? Not only her natal magic weapon is with me, but her cultivation has also been greatly damaged. Then, he stopped smiling and said, Do you think a few stinky Taoist priests like you deserve to take my life? Kong Tongzi was dumbfounded. Emperor Li didn't like Li Yunxin at first, but after hearing what Li Yunxin said he laughed. I like this. What kind of people are those stinky Taoist priests? Li Yunxin smiled at him, but Kong Tongzi shouted again. It's fake. It must be fake. He shouted hoarsely, as if what was taken away was not Kong Tongzi's treasure, but his own. You demons are cunning, you used this clumsy method. At this point, Li Yunxin flipped his hand, and casually threw the glazed sword heart in front of Kong Tongzi. See for yourself. After he took out the treasure, the vast mountains nearby were illuminated by the light emitted by the golden magic weapon. Whether they knew or not, they all knew that this must be a very powerful and precious thing. When he said that this was the natal magic weapon of the head of Kinzo's Wuji sword sect, everyone knew that it was indeed a precious treasure. Then when someone sighed, how dare he show such a precious thing to others? Is he not afraid of being coveted by others? But he suddenly threw this treasure in front of Kong Tongzi, as if he was throwing some peels of a peach. This dazzling golden glazed sword core landed on the boulder, emitting a crisp sound that stunned everyone. It spun in front of Kong Tongzi a few times before stopping. Then, Kong Tongzi suddenly pounced on it, stretched out his hands, and tightly hugged it, as if he was afraid that someone would snatch it. Then, he stared at Li Yunxin with surprise and suspicion, and then dared to look down at the treasure. Perhaps the cultivators of Wuji sword sect had some unique method to identify this thing. Kong Tongzi only looked at it, touched it, and then suddenly raised his head, his lips trembling violently. Then he shouted, It's real! It's real! Then he was stunned for a moment, and suddenly danced with joy. Ah, ha 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 ha! The glazed sword heart is in my hands. It's in my hands. As he shouted, he hugged the thing tightly. He crawled 2 steps to Li Yunxin and grabbed his leg. He raised his head and looked at Li Yunxin with a burning gaze. This demon king, I am also willing to be a demon. Since you gave this to me, then you definitely want to use me, right? I will be loyal and devoted to you. I will go through fire and water, through mountains of blades and seas of fire. Ah, please bestow this glazed sword heart to me. I am willing to do anything. But Li Yunxin kicked him away. Emperor Li saw this and sized up Li Yunxin. He suddenly said to Emperor Yi Xingyang, This kid is an interesting person. I think I like him a little. To be able to casually throw away the glazed sword heart. There isn't a second person in the world, right? Li Yunxin smiled. This thing is useless to me. Since it is useless, then it is dead. As he said that, he turned his head and looked at Kong Tongzi. Since you like it, then take it. Tell your sect leader that I am giving it to her. Then ask her if you want it or not. Let's see if she is willing to give it to you. Kong Tongzi didn't know what he meant, and could only stare at him. At this moment, the demons in the forest all lowered their bodies. Even the dozens of fierce beasts that were blocking the way lowered their heads to the ground. Suddenly, a chilly wind blew in the forest, sending sand and stones flying. General Honghua shouted, My king, you are finally here. Her voice was different from before. There was a hint of coquettishness hidden in it. Then, the demon soldiers hiding in the forest suddenly shouted in unison. Their voices spread throughout the mountains, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Welcome Marshal Tongtian, Flying Tiger King Yujun. Amidst the deafening shouts, a gust of black wind swept past the treetops from the northwest, and swept towards the edge of the cliff. Yujun seemed to be purposely showing off his power. He only paced around in the forest, but didn't show himself. In the deep night, he only shouted in a low voice, like rolling thunder. You 2 ghost kings have been hiding in the mountains for many days. But you refused to listen to the Lord Tongtian, and you are rude to me. Today, I have gathered a great army to capture you all. Emperor Li, a few days ago, you angered the Lord Tongtian in Tongtian Swampland, and even hurt him. Do you know what will happen to you if I capture you this time? As soon as he shouted, The group of demons immediately shouted in agreement, their might intimidating. In this tide-like shout, General Hong Hua shouted again. My king, not only did we stop these two old ghosts, we also stopped a treasure. The life treasure of the leader of the 5 demon sword sect, the glazed sword heart, is also in the hands of this swordsman. Congratulations, my king. Today, you have killed 2 birds with 1 stone. At this moment, Li Yunqing finally knew what the 2 ghost kings were doing here. In fact, the 2 ghost kings had been fighting with Yu Jun in the mountains for a long time. Tonight's matter was supposed to be between them. The Li army and the Qing army were just unlucky to run into these demons. However, when they were in Hatred's palace, he didn't know. Who would have thought that this Yu Jun would have such an imposing manner, such a grand show of extravagance? Chapter 395. Hearing the good news from General Red Flame, Lin Weiwei's black wind suddenly paused. Then he laughed out loud. Is that so? I just had a drink with the demon kings, and the heavens sent me such a wonderful thing. Let me have a look. Where is the treasure? As soon as he finished his words, Heifeng suddenly retracted his body and turned into a man with a stocky build. He appeared in front of the formation, beside General Red Flame. Li Yunqing had seen Yu Jun before. At that time, he was in Hatred's palace, and a group of demon kings made things difficult for him. And Yu Jun was one of the first few to make things difficult for him. After that, he used the aura in the palace to kill a great demon emperor at the peak of the true state. These demon kings were shocked and didn't dare to say anything more. At that time, he saw Yu Jun only wearing close-fitting light armor. But now, Yu Jun was wearing a full set of armor. Perhaps it was because all the demon soldiers under her had come out at the same time, which made her look extremely majestic. She was wearing a thick and heavy armor made of black iron fish scales. Her skirt covered her knees and was about 2 to 3 fingers thick. He wore a black iron crown on his head, but there were no feathers on the crown. Instead, there were 2 human skulls embedded in the crown. He wore a pair of tiger head boots made of python skin, and the eyes of the tiger head were made of fiery red gems. They were still shining in the dark night. He held a large golden saber in his hand. Yu Jun was a demon, and he was much taller than ordinary people. He was more than 10 feet tall, and was as tall as 2 to 3 people. Therefore, the saber's blade was also very large, and it looked like a door. When people saw these fierce beasts blocking the way, they only felt that these fierce beasts were very majestic. But now, Yu Jun landed on the fierce beast and treated it as his mount. As soon as the Tiger Demon King appeared, the demons in the forest became very imposing, and their voices rose to the sky. The Tiger Demon was also very proud of himself. Riding on the back of the fierce beast, he lifted the door-sized saber with one hand and pointed it at the big green rock. Emperor Li, today let's settle our old scores. When the Tiger Demon King appeared, Emperor Li didn't want to show weakness. Therefore, he took 2 steps forward and stood at the edge of the large green rock, blocking Li Yunqing who was behind him. Hearing his challenge, Emperor Li sneered and said, "You? When I was the son of heaven, you were just demons hiding in the mountains. When I became a ghost cultivator, I didn't even put you in my eyes. That Lord Tong Tian attacked me when I was seriously injured and delirious, but he was still defeated by me. Do you think someone like you is qualified to challenge me?" Li Yunqing frowned slightly at the curses of the 2 fiend demons. Emperor Li used to be a human, so it was understandable that he had the habit of being human. However, this Yu Jun was a demon. Back in the Palace of Hatred, he couldn't wait to eat Wu Qi. With such a violent and rash temperament, he was now acting like a general and cursing in front of the formation instead of brandishing his saber. It was really strange. While he was hesitating, Yi Emperor Lu Xingyang, who was behind Emperor Li, took a step towards him and said in a low voice, "Li Yunqing, you should leave now." Li Yunqing was slightly stunned. Lu Xingyang said, "Ji Lan and I have something to do here, so we can't leave. But I was seriously injured in Weidu and haven't recovered yet. Ji Lan is also seriously injured. Now she is only at the level of perfected master, so she may not be a match for Yu Jun. But Yu Jun has been defeated by us before, so we are in a stalemate now. Maybe he is waiting for help. If you don't leave now, when his help comes, you won't be able to leave either. Ji was the surname of the royal family of Li Kingdom. Therefore, Li Yunqin knew that this Ji Lan referred to Emperor Li. It seemed that the two ghost emperors seemed to have some plans in this mountain, so they lingered here and there. Before this, he had fought with the tiger demon a few times, so they were evenly matched. Li Yunqin wasn't a warm-hearted person. He was only willing to share his feelings with people he liked. As for Yi Emperor Lv, he could barely be considered as someone he looked up to. Before the city of Wei was burned down by the Taoists of Langya Cave Heaven, Yi Emperor risked his life to send his subordinates out of the city because of his promise to him. He hadn't returned this favor yet. This kind of thing was just friendship for ordinary people. But for cultivators, it was friendship and karmic debt. Therefore, Li Yunqin sighed slightly in his heart. Since he was involved in this, it was time to return the favor. He smiled at Lu Xingyang. In the city of Wei, we used each other and took what we needed. But when the city was destroyed, you were still loyal. This is something I didn't expect. I am a person who will take revenge and repay kindness. I will return this favor to you today. Tell me, are the two of you planning to leave this place? Or are you planning to kill this Yu Jun as well? Lu Xingyang shook his head. We can't say what we are going to do. Now, you don't have to put yourself in a difficult position. We will always have a way. Emperor Li also listened to Li Yunqin's words. At this moment, when Yu Jun started to scold again, he turned back. You really talk big. Although I'm only in the true state, I've already fought with this tiger demon a few times, and I haven't gained any advantage. Yet you're talking about killing it. Do you think that your means are above mine? This tiger demon is waiting for reinforcements. But I want to end it with him tonight. In another hour, when the crescent moon rises in the sky, I will be at the peak of my power. I will kill this reckless beast. Li Yunqin said softly. Oh, he knew that at this moment, Emperor Li was indeed holding on. He didn't have the confidence to defeat Yu Jun, so he had to wait for the right time. But because of some special reason, he couldn't just leave. And Yu Jun seemed to have fought with the two ghost emperors before and didn't gain any advantage. So he was also waiting for reinforcements. In fact, this Emperor Li was a guy worth befriending. Li Yunqin had a few thoughts in his mind. Emperor Li was the enemy of hatred, which meant he was the enemy of all the demons of the Dragon Dynasty. But naturally, he was the enemy of the Xian men. And his words also revealed that it was the Freemasonry who killed him. They were the most reliable natural allies. And look at Emperor Li. When they first met, his words were full of contempt, as if he looked down on him. But soon after, he praised him for one or two trivial things. This meant that Emperor Li was actually a very rare person in this world, with a true temperament. Maybe it had something to do with his previous profession. As an emperor, especially the emperor of the Li Kingdom, he probably didn't have to care about what others thought, and he could express his emotions as much as he wanted. So Li Yunqin laughed in a low voice. In terms of cultivation, I may not be better than you, Your Majesty, but in terms of tactics. As he said so, he slowly walked out from the darkness behind Emperor Li. At this moment, Tiger Demon Yu Jun was cursing. Speaking proudly, he turned to look at the demon soldiers and demon generals around him. Those demons immediately laughed along with him. Yu Jun also laughed proudly. As soon as he turned back, he saw Li Yunqin, who appeared next to Emperor Li. As a result, his laughter was stuck in his throat. His mouth was wide open, and he did not have the time to close it. He looked extremely strange. When the fiery red general saw Li Yunqin, she stretched out her hand and put her arm around Li Yunqin's waist, which was as thick as a water bucket, and said in a sweet voice, "My lord, there is also this man. Isn't he the demon that my lord mentioned a few days ago?" But he didn't hear his king say anything. When he looked up, he saw Yu Jun's dumbfounded look, so he was also stunned. Yu Jun and the Red General didn't say anything. So the demon soldiers and demon generals in the forest also stopped talking, not knowing what had happened. So for a moment, as soon as Li Yunqin appeared, the cliff immediately became silent, which was very weird. Emperor Li frowned and turned to look at Emperor Yi. But Lv Xingyang was also puzzled. Li Yunqin was only in the transcendent state when she was in the city of Wei. Later, she became a demon of the real state with his power, but her cultivation was not very high. Why did it become like this? They didn't know, and neither did Li Yunxin. Why did Yu Jun become so afraid of him? But Yu Jun himself knew it. He cursed in his heart. Why did he meet such a devil? He didn't take Lord of Wei River and Qi Wen seriously at first. On the contrary, when they were in the Yazi Palace, the group of demon kings, led by human sovereigns, wanted to share and eat this so-called Wei River Lord. Even if they didn't eat him, they wanted to scare him so that the dragon's son, who had a low cultivation base, would know that they, the demon kings of the mountains, were not easy to deal with. But unexpectedly, he killed that human monarch on the spot. How could they not know the cultivation of human monarch? Sometimes he didn't even give face to Lord Tongtian. And he even had the intention of making himself king. Yu Jun had fought with human monarch before, not to mention killing him in an instant. It was very difficult for him to not get severely injured. Hence, that day in the hall, all the monster kings were trembling in fear after the death of the king. They all knew this point. This Lord of Wei River killed human monarch with one strike. How brilliant was he? 2 days ago, they got to know another thing. Lord Tongtian's hatred was furious, and he suddenly gave the order to hunt. It was said that Long Jiu Wei River killed Wanderer Bai at night, and broke into Lord Tongtian's study to spy on his secrets. Which of the usually unruly monster kings had the guts to do this? He killed Long Duchin Master's people, and broke into Lord Tongtian's study. Even if Yu Jun was a guy with guts as thick as a water bucket, he felt a chill down his spine when he thought of this. Lord of Wei River looked like a human. He wasn't muscular, and he talked like a scholar. But he did such a crazy thing. Because of these things, Yu Jun was afraid of him. Yesterday, Lord Tongtian ordered all the monster kings to capture Li Yunxin in his rage. Yu Jun got this order, and immediately sent people to find trouble with Emperor Li and Emperor Yi. He wanted to make sure that he couldn't leave here, so that he wouldn't meet Li Yunxin. Who would have thought that they would actually bump into each other here? Chapter 396. Yu Jun was stunned for a few breaths of time, until General Honghua squeezed his arm and asked in a low voice, "What happened to my lord?" The tiger demon blinked his eyes and shook off the demon general beside him. It's actually Wei River Lord. When he came, he was aggressive and insufferably arrogant. When he spoke, he was full of ambition and fearless. But as soon as they saw Li Yunxin, the expression on their faces instantly changed. And it was a world of difference, causing all the people on the cliff to be stunned. But it only took Li Yunxin 2 breaths of time to understand the inside story. This result was originally planned by him. He killed King Renjun in the Hall of Hatred, and then did all kinds of things to establish his prestige among the demons. He had not recovered from his serious injuries. Even if he recovered, he was not the strongest among the demon kings. Only by using this kind of method to intimidate them all, no one would dare to attack him in the future. Now he saw the results, and the results were unexpectedly good. Therefore he grinned and said, "King Yu Jun is very impressive." The 2 rows of white teeth in his mouth flickered in the eyes of those ferocious beasts. Then, he took 2 steps forward and said, "Back in the hall, Lord Yu was one of those who said they would share with me. Unfortunately, I only killed that King Renjun, and didn't have a chance to get close to King Yu Jun." He stopped and stared at the tiger demon. "Now King Yu Jun can't wait to chase after me. Is he seeking death?" Hearing this, the tiger demon's heart beat wildly. King Renjun was killed by him. Wanderer Bai, who added fuel to the fire in the hall that day, was also killed by him. This guy really bore a grudge because of what happened that day? A demon of the true realm like him had long developed intelligence. Although he was usually cruel, he still cherished his life. Hearing what Li Yunxin said, he couldn't care about anything else. He just wanted to escape first, and then think about it later. Thus he hurriedly waved his hands. No. Lord Wei River has misunderstood. That Lord Tongtian. After Lord Wei River left, he was furious. He ordered all the demon kings to capture Lord Wei River. The tiger demon rolled its eyes. When I was in the hall, I saw Lord Wei River's appearance and fell in love. Admiration. That's why I wanted to send a message to Lord Wei River. How could I have any other thoughts? All the demon generals around King Li Yunxin were stunned when they saw what he did. General Red Flame glanced at Li Yunxin, then at his own king, and didn't know what to say for a long while. But in the end he was still a coward. He knew that he had brought bad luck to his king, and provoked a formidable fellow. Thus, he quietly retreated to the back of the formation, not daring to make a sound. Emperor Li furrowed his brows. He stared at Li Yunxin for a while, and then turned to look at Emperor Yi. Emperor Yi Xingyang was confused too. So many things had happened in the few months that they were apart. How could he know what Li Yunxin had encountered, how many hardships he had gone through, and how did he get to where he was today? Thus he was at a loss. Li Yunxin stood in the wind. He lowered his head and brushed his nails. Then, he looked up and smiled at King Li Yunxin. I see. Then I owe you a favor. Then, he stopped smiling and snorted coldly. You don't have to say such nonsense to me. Do you think I don't know what you and that hatred are thinking? Since I have fallen out with him, we are irreconcilable enemies. You saw me here today. When you go back, you will definitely inform him. I'm not afraid of that. I'm going to find someone to tell him that I don't want to be with him anymore. King Li Yunxin didn't know that Li Yunxin had discussed with Hatred and Zither Lady about the plot against Xianmen. He also didn't know what happened that night. Now that he had heard all this, he could only muddle-headedly feel that there was some discord between the Dragon Clan brothers, and they had finally turned against each other. Then, he heard that Li Yunxin was going to let him go back and inform him. He felt relieved. Now that he knew that the danger was over, he thought of other things. Tonight was really embarrassing. Moreover, it was witnessed by so many demons. But he couldn't kill all of his subordinates. I can only wait until I escape and gather people to capture this Li Yunxin and skin her alive. Only then can I save some face. Once he thought of this, a ferocious glint appeared in his eyes. He even regained some of his courage. Thus he coughed. Of course. Wei River Lord is magnanimous and doesn't mind the past. I'm really grateful. But where is Wei River Lord going from now on? If I know, I can give an explanation to Lord Tongtian. Otherwise, if I find out that I met Wei River Lord empty-handed. Li Yunxin frowned and interrupted him. I told you to leave. You don't want to leave. Do you want to die here? I'll fulfill your wish. The tiger demon shivered. The courage he had just gained almost disappeared. He hurriedly said, Yes. I'll go back and tell Wei River Lord. Go. Then he turned around and shouted. He rode on the beast and was about to leave. His beloved General Red Fire had only heard of the name Li Yunxin. The other demon soldiers and generals didn't know what had happened. Now that their king wanted to leave, they had to leave. However, he had just taken 2 steps when Li Yunxin on the cliff shouted again. Wait! The tiger demon was stunned and turned to look at him. But Li Yunxin frowned. There was a long, thin golden object in his hand. Bring this dragon god token back to Hatred. Most demons in the world knew about the dragon god token. It was said that it was made from the scales of Shinryu. However, there were only a few who had actually seen it. Now that they saw the one in Li Yunxin's hand, they immediately knew that it was real. The reason was none other than because the divine dragon token emitted a pressure that seemed to have come from the primordial times, and when the heavens and the earth were split apart. It wasn't very strong, but it possessed a peerless dignity that caused one's scalp to go numb, one's legs to go weak, and one couldn't help but want to prostrate in worship. The tiger demon was first frightened by Li Yunxin, then released by Li Yunxin, and now it was called back. Seeing such a rare treasure, its mood fluctuated several times. And with the deterrence of the dragon god token's dragon chi, its mind gradually became muddled. Firstly, it was because of his yearning for this treasure. Secondly, it was because he had let down his guard slightly. Hence, after a slight daze, he stared at the thing in Li Yunxin's hand. This is to be given to little Wang? Li Yunxin frowned and shouted impatiently. What's with all this nonsense? Come and get the dragon god token, and bring it back to him. How could Yu Jun think about it? For ordinary demons like them, who didn't have the thought of taking a look and touching the divine dragon token? Thus, He hurriedly jumped off the ferocious beast he was sitting on and ran over with large strides. He jumped up the cliff and stood in front of Li Yunxin. At this moment, General Honghua felt that something was wrong. She said, "My king." But the tiger demon's mind was focused on the dragon god token. He couldn't hear her. He stretched out his thick arms and involuntarily knelt on one knee, waiting for Li Yunxin to hand over this supreme treasure to him. He was more than 10 feet tall. Now that he knelt on one knee, his body was the same as Li Yunxin's. But Li Yunxin didn't give him the dragon god token immediately. Instead, he threw it in his hand and held it. He waited a few more times. Seeing that the tiger demon's eyes were following the dragon god token in his hand, he suddenly laughed and said, "I can give you the token. But you, Jun, you have to give me something in exchange." Because of Li Yunxin's manipulation of people's hearts, because of the flickering light of the night, because of the fear of lingering on the edge of life and death, because of the devil planted in his heart, because of the fear of the demon race's treasure. At this moment, Yu Jun had completely lost his mind. He could only speak in a daze, as Lord Wei River commands. "Your head is so hairy and cute." Li Yunxin laughed. "Why don't you let me play with it?" After that, he waved his right hand. The body of a true state demon was strong, but this dragon god token, which looked like a small sword, was given to him by Shinryu and Dongting that night. The scales of Shinryu were tough and sharp. How could a strong body be able to resist it? Puchi, the head of the true state demon Yu Jun, flew up into the sky, and so did his blood. Li Yunxin reached out his hand and grabbed the tiger demon's head. In just a breath's time, the huge human head revealed its true form, turning into a furry tiger head. Then, he uttered a spell, and a ball of green light appeared in his left hand. He waved it again. The unlocked Toad Palace, a magic treasure made by the sages, spread out silently and imprisoned the tiger demon's soul as well. At this moment, the huge body on the roof fell down. It stayed on the rock for a while, then fell down because of the lubrication of its own blood. A huge tiger body landed on the ground, raising a cloud of dust. This sudden turn of events caused the demons in the forest to be dumbfounded once again. After 3 breaths' time, when Li Yunxin threw Yu Jun's head to the ground and let it roll to the feet of General Honghua, these little demons cried out, "Our king is dead!" Then they fled in all directions. The trees in the forest shook, the owls flew away, and the dust rose into the sky. It was as if a great army was defeated. Only then did Li Yunxin clap his hands and turned to look at Emperor Li. "Your Majesty, what do you think of my trick?" Emperor Li was stunned. After 3 breaths' time he frowned. Then he frowned. "You." After a moment of silence, his brows relaxed and he laughed out loud. Good, good, good. When I was the emperor of the human world, I had a general named Chun Qingji. He wore a white robe and was very brave. There was a nursery rhyme that said, "Great generals should not be imprisoned, and armies avoid the white robe." And now, you Li Yunxin. Ha ha ha, you can also be called, "Armies avoid the white robe." Asterisk 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 Chun Qingji, a general of southern Liang during the northern and southern dynasties. Armies avoid the white robe. From the history of southern dynasties, Chun Qingji. Under the rock, the Qing army and Li army watched all of this happen, but could do nothing. They could not escape or resist. They could only watch in the cold autumn night and wait for the heavens to decide. At this moment, although the demons had retreated in a panic, they saw the terrifying changes that had happened to the sword cultivator Kong Tongzi. They also knew that this so-called priest Han Yuanzi was actually a great demon, so they were even more terrified. Then, they saw Li Yunxin turn around and say to Emperor Yi, "Brother Liu, I know you have an obsession, but now I am also cultivating. I have some demons in my heart that I need to dispel, and some emotional tribulations that I need to go through. These Qing army have been with me for a day and a night, so it can be said that we are connected by fate. Brother Liu, can you do me a favor and let them live?" Liu Junyang frowned. "When I was in the city of Wei, I knew you were a cultivator. Now that you are a demon, are you still cultivating?" Hearing this, Emperor Li also frowned. "Cultivator, humph. What's so good about learning from those stinky Taoists? As he spoke, he looked coldly at Kong Tongzi sitting on the ground. For example, this stupid thing. He cultivates, and has many tribulations to go through. And in the end, now that his cultivation is completely crippled, what's the use? It's better to be a demon like us and live freely. Who cares about the tribulations? Li Yunxin smiled. I just want to experience the feeling of the Taishang realm. He said this casually, as if he wasn't talking about the supreme realm of Taishang Wangqing, but about which restaurant's food was delicious. Emperor Li and Emperor Yi were both stunned by his words. Then Emperor Li said, "What did you say?" It seemed that he had heard wrongly. Taishang Wangqing. There was still a trace of a smile on Li Yunxin's lips. He said lightly, "Both of you are first-rate immortals and demons now. Aren't you curious about the experience of the highest realm of cultivation?" Emperor Li took a step back and looked at him again. This guy was really strange. When he was an emperor, he had seen many people. Even though some people said he was muddle-headed, even the muddle-headed emperor of a country had the ability to recognize people. He just didn't want to use it. But now Li Yunxin had surprised him several times. It was really interesting. Emperor Li Jilan was a proud person. So, she only liked LV Xingyang. They were both emperors of a country, and had some common language. But now, she felt that the more she looked at Li Yunxin, the more she liked him. So she couldn't help but say a few more words. There are so many interesting things in the world. Why do you only focus on cultivation? Isn't it more interesting to expand and build a new world? Li Yunxin shook his head. It's boring for me. In this world, perhaps the only thing that can attract me is the matter of cultivation. I have never experienced it, and I can't imagine it either. Every step was novel and not dull at all. As for expanding and building a new world, it's just an extra gain on the way. It's not the goal. Then he looked at LV Xingyang. You want to be happy, but I want to see something new. If I know I can't see it, this world for me has no fun. He made the matter sound so serious that LV Xingyang sighed. Just this once. Li Yunxin raised his hands to him and picked up Kong Tongzi on the rock. With a leap, he landed in front of the Qing army. An hour ago, he was in the Qing army. These soldiers still felt safe. Now, when he landed again, the Qing people around him all retreated. In an instant, a large space was cleared for him. In the end, he had beaten back the demon soldiers all over the mountain. These Qing soldiers did not run. They only stared at him in a daze. Their faces were filled with fear and hesitation. They didn't know what was waiting for them. But Ding Min didn't retreat. He was an old soldier, and the leader of this small group. If he retreated like everyone else, it would be a very embarrassing thing. And so, he stood in front of Li Yunxin one step away. Li Yunxin casually threw the old Kong Tongzi at his feet. Take him and go down the mountain. Then, hand him over to the people of the Five Sword sects. Your matter is over. Ding Min gritted his teeth. He looked at Kong Tongzi, and then at Li Yunxin. After a moment he said, You are a demon. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and looked at him with a false smile. So, how can there be a demon like you? You don't seem like a demon. Ding Min's voice was raspy and raspy. It was as if he was doing his best to control his throat, so that his voice wouldn't tremble. Why did you save us? What is your goal? Seeing that Li Yunxin didn't speak, and didn't have any intention of harming him, his voice eased slightly. He then said, You are different from other demons. Although you saved us, if you want us to do something that goes against. Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. Turning his body, he said, What do you have on you that is worth me scheming against? After saying this, he leaped back onto the rock. After a moment, these Qing soldiers looked at each other. Naturally, there was nothing on them that was worth this great demon scheming against, right? But why did he save them? But they still heard Li Yunxin's order, including Li Yunxin's army. Diwu Jing, who was kneeling under the rock, turned his head to look at the Qing soldiers, and then at Kong Tongzi. Only then did he stand up and saluted Emperor Li. Your Majesty. Emperor Li turned to look at him. Diwu Jing said, Your Majesty, I am not willing to go. I am willing to stay by your Majesty's side, and kill our way into the capital to get rid of the evil and the fake emperor. Emperor Li smiled. You are loyal. But if you stay by my side, what about these people? Are you also willing to stay by my side? The ghost emperor asked. But only a few people said, I am also willing. But more people didn't say anything. They just lowered their bodies even more. Those who left the army were just ordinary people. They had wives and daughters and they had families. Most of them risked their lives not for the Li Kingdom or the emperor, but for their wives and children, and to get promoted and get rich. This situation was already in Diwu Jing's mind. He continued, Your Majesty, these brothers also have wives and children. They are not like this general who is all alone. I think. At this point, Emperor Li suddenly burst into laughter. His voice was so loud that the ground trembled slightly. I am all alone. Good. Am I not alone now? Then he turned to Emperor Yi. Brother, your general of the Jinwu guards, Diwu Boyu, has the same surname as my loyal general Diwu Jing. It seems that we are fated. Fifth Jing was slightly stunned. After a moment he said, Fifth Earl Yu, Your Majesty, the ancestors of this general's branch were originally from the Yi country. One of our ancestors was the general of the Golden Guards of the Yi country, Fifth Earl Yu. Emperor Li laughed even more. He waved his big sleeve, and suddenly a gust of black air swept through the air. It was like a shadow shrouding the heads of every soldier of the Li Kingdom. Since there is such a connection, I will grant you your wish. I will make you the general of cavalry of the Ghost Kingdom of the Nether Kingdom. Since you are a general, how can you not have soldiers under your command? If you like them, they will be with you. As soon as he said this, Diwu Jing exclaimed, Your Majesty, no. But his voice stopped abruptly. After the black air swept through, nearly 100 soldiers of the Li Kingdom fell to the ground. After a moment, more than 90 souls with blurred faces stood up from the corpses. Emperor Li killed all these people in one breath. Chapter 398. Seeing all of this, the Qing army was so shocked that they couldn't speak. Li Yunqin also saw all of this, but only shook his head slightly. After all, the emperor of the Li Kingdom had a reputation for being stupid and cruel when he was alive. After death he became a ghost. How could he suddenly become a good person? Humans were good, and ghosts were good. Just a moment ago, Emperor Li had said that he wouldn't let anyone touch his people. Now he had killed them all. Maybe in his heart he still felt that he had promised them immortality. But this was what a ghost emperor should be like. Although these Li soldiers were dead, their souls were not conscious for a while. It would take some time before they could be used by the ghost emperor. But this use was nothing more than being used as a group of cannon fodder. They could not become ghost cultivators like the two ghost emperors. For a soul to become a ghost cultivator, it required a lot of luck. Ordinary people might not even have one soul in 100,000. Yet, Emperor Li wanted to use Diwu Jing. Did he have a way to turn a normal person like Diwu Jing into a clear-minded ghost cultivator? But Li Yunqin's question could not be answered. Emperor Li waved his sleeves again, and these souls were all taken into his sleeves. This was strange. Emperor Li, a mortal who had become a ghost cultivator only a few months ago, could use magical powers. In the blink of an eye, he had done all of this. The Qing soldiers who were still alive did not dare to stay. Earlier, Li Yunqin had asked Yi Di for a favor. Now he didn't need to say anything. Taking advantage of the night, he retreated into the forest. It seemed that he wanted to find another way down the mountain. Emperor Li did not stop them. Instead, he turned around and looked at Li Yunqin. I don't care what you like or what you want, but I think you are a congenial person. I also heard from my brother that you are not happy with any demons or Xianmen. Since it is so, do you want to do something spectacular with me? Cultivation. There must be a way to cultivate. Those stupid Taoist priests who only sit on the cloud mountain and cultivate, they won't be able to cultivate anything good. Li Yunqin smiled. What is your majesty planning to do? Emperor Li suddenly looked into the distance and said, We shouldn't stay here any longer. Follow me. After saying this, the man in the robe suddenly shook, and his figure turned from solid to intangible, turning into a black cloud, and went far away into the dense forest of the rolling mountain. Once Emperor Li left, Emperor Yi followed. Li Yunxin stood alone on the big green rock. He first looked at the distant and sparse lights in the vast plain at the foot of the mountain, and then looked at the heavy rolling mountains. After thinking for a while, he also transformed into a gust of evil wind and followed. After entering the forest for more than 30 miles, he did not know where exactly he was. He followed the aura left behind by the two emperors, and saw an open space in the forest. The open land looked familiar. It was like the woodland where he first met Mrs. Sanhua. It was surrounded by towering trees, but there were only weeds growing in the forest. A dilapidated temple was half hidden in the weeds. It was obvious that it had been buried for many years. The two ghost emperors seemed to be in this temple. Li Yunxin hesitated for a while, and then followed them in. However, as soon as he passed through the rotten door frame of the temple, the world in front of him suddenly changed. The walls of the temple suddenly became extremely tall, and rose up to the sky. It was as if he had stepped into the gate of the heavenly palace. He instantly came to a vast and deep hall. Li Yunxin hurriedly looked out and saw weeds as tall as trees. It turned out that the temple did not become bigger, but his body became smaller. In this dilapidated temple, there was actually another world. He didn't know if it was because of some magic treasure or method, but a vast space was opened up inside. But this space was vast, but it was not deserted. Li Yunxin saw thousands, tens of thousands of souls. He had seen more souls in the city of Wei. There were more than 1 million souls. But at that time, he was high up in the sky among the clouds. And the millions of souls were scattered all over the mountain, so it was not big. But now, the vast land in front of him was almost filled with dead souls. It was like a blue ocean, with no end in sight. In this ocean of souls, Emperor Li and Emperor Yi stood on a towering cliff. In fact, the cliff was half a protruding brick. But looking at it now, it was covered with moss and branches and leaves. It looked like it was covered with vertical blades. It was very imposing. These souls were all muddle-headed, and did not have any intelligence. They only stood blankly or paced back and forth, letting out low and miserable howls from their mouths. Many roars gathered in one place, filling the entire space. It was as if the whole world was coming to an end. Even though Li Yunxin was knowledgeable and strong-willed, he felt his scalp tingle when he saw this scene. He had never been to the Sunluo Hall, and didn't know what the ghost realm looked like. But the scene in front of him was probably not much worse than the ghost realm. Emperor Li stood on the cliff and waved his sleeves. The souls of the Li army he killed were released and gathered among the ghosts in the hall. Then he turned to look at Li Yunxin. His face was full of vigor. He raised his hands high and said, "You asked me what big thing I am going to do. This is my big thing." Along with his movement, the ghosts also roared with unknown meaning. The sound waves came to Yifutian, but these muddle-headed souls didn't seem to know what Emperor Li was talking about. At most, they acted according to their instincts. Li Yunxin pondered for a moment, and came up with a plan. A vague idea appeared in his mind. He felt that he seemed to know what the ghost emperor was going to do. Emperor Yi also wanted to do this in the past, to build a ghost kingdom in the human world. "You want to build a ghost kingdom?" Li Yunxin asked. But Emperor Li laughed. "Ghost kingdom? Humph." He laughed and his face turned cold. His eyes were full of arrogance. "When I was the emperor of the human world, the territory I ruled was extremely vast. I didn't care about a city, a land, or a country. A ghost kingdom is just a kingdom after all. What I want to build is the netherworld." Li Yunxin heard his answer but didn't laugh. Instead, he was silent for a while and frowned. "So, you look down on a city, a land, or a country. Now you want a world. But why do you want to do this?" Emperor Li looked at his reaction and sighed. He turned to Emperor Yi and said, "This person is really a wonderful person." Then he turned to look at Li Yunxin. "Don't you know? You are also a wonderful person. Haven't you thought about it? This world between the heaven and the earth, what are they?" "I used to respect the heaven and the earth. I also respected the celestial beings. I thought that the celestial being Xianmen shepherded the people, and that there was justice in the world. Although this justice can't reach me, I always know that there is justice." Emperor Li sneered and waved his sleeves, as if he wanted to wipe away all the words he said just now. "But when I die, I will know. I became a ghost king. First, I killed those stinky Taoists who came to capture me. So I know those Daotong and Kenzo. It's not a big deal. Then I went to Tongtian Swamp and met the fire scale worm. After a fierce fight with him, I also know that demons are not a big deal. When I gradually regained my senses, I knew that it was the enemy and the Freemasonry. Then I investigated. The Xianmen can't do anything to them. It turns out that the Xianmen and demons are like mortals. They don't have the ability to go to heaven. They are just mortals who know spells. As for the celestial beings, when I was a human, I only felt that those demons and gods were hiding in another world. But after I became a demon, I knew that there was no such thing as another world. Those celestial beings are just Esoto. If that's the case, the Xianmen that I respected before couldn't do justice for me, and the celestial beings were nowhere to be found. Then didn't I die in vain? If the Freemasonry takes over the world in the future, who can I find to settle my grievances? Emperor Li frowned. When I was the emperor, I was the justice for the people of the Li Kingdom. But when I became a ghost, who is the justice for me? No one. It turns out that there is no justice in this world. Since that's the case, why don't you let me establish justice? Emperor Li said this crazily, and Li Yunxin sighed in his heart. So that's how it is. When Emperor Li died, it was just when Black Bai Yanjun disappeared from the world of the living. So his soul was not taken away, and he saw the dead souls all over the ground and couldn't escape. So he realized that the world after death, which he was so secretive about as a human, was just a small world. It was just that he changed his form and continued to live in this world. There was no mystery at all. Since there was no mystery, the feeling of awe was also gone. He was an emperor, and he had natural ambition, pride and self-esteem. When the celestial beings and the Yama kings were all hiding from the world for some reason, he wanted to do something for himself. Li Yunxin understood his feelings. When Bai Yanjun gave him the Book of Life and Death and the soul-binding lock, didn't he already know it? This world was a world of wolves and wolves. The celestial beings and the Yama kings couldn't do justice for people, and there was no karma for good and evil. The wicked who enjoyed all the glory and wealth might be more honorable in the next life, while the righteous who died with injustice might not get any good karma in the next life, and they might continue to be miserable. But he was born to be idle, and didn't like to make trouble. Now Emperor Li also saw all this clearly, but as an emperor in the past, he liked to make trouble. Li Yunxin thought about this and smiled. So, what kind of nether world does your majesty want? Emperor Li stood with his hands behind his back. This nether world is going to be amazing. I want that person to come to my nether world after he dies. I will interrogate him myself. I will ask him how many evil things he has done in the world, and how many good things he has done. If he has done evil, I will imprison him and torture him with torture. As for the good things, Emperor Li thought for a while and suddenly rolled his eyes. Why do you think so much now? There will always be a way out. Now that the demon was killing the mortal soldiers in the mountains, there were many dead souls wandering around this place. The reason why I don't leave here is to collect those souls. Li Yunxin shook his head slightly. Since Emperor Li had become a ghost, he naturally had great ambitions. Unfortunately, although he had ambition and action, his mind was damaged after being a ghost, so he couldn't be comprehensive. He didn't know what would happen to Emperor Li's netherworld in the future, but now he knew there was an insurmountable obstacle. No matter how high his personal ability was, he was at most the Grand Supreme. But Black Bai Yanjun should be on another level completely different from the Grand Supreme. Li Yunxin had never seen Bai Yanjun show any other means. However, just the ability to create countless incarnations, to lead the souls of the dead everywhere, was already far beyond the scope of any cultivation method that he knew of. What's more, it was said that this method was passed down by the celestial beings, and the celestial being named Shun Mu could also create the method of painting Tao after descending to the mortal world. It could be seen that the celestial being's magic was just a toy to the celestial beings. And in the folklore, Black Bai Yanjun was also a celestial being in the past. Now for some reason, The two monarchs didn't appear in the world of the living, so Emperor Li could have fun. If the Yama king reappeared, just as he was thinking of this, he heard Emperor Li shout, "I told you these things and brought you to our nether world. Li Yunxin, do you want to do this unprecedented thing with me?" Li Yunxin thought for a moment and cupped his hands. "I came with your majesty because of my friendship with brother Xingyang, and also because I was curious about what you two are doing here. Now that I have seen it clearly, it's time to leave." He said this, and Emperor Li was about to get angry, but Li Yunxin said again, "Don't be impatient. Your majesty said that there is no justice in this world, and I deeply agree with this. This is a world of wolves. But your majesty has ambitions, and I just want to be a free and happy wanderer. However, it's not that I can't help your majesty. It's just that I have done something for your majesty, and I really hope that when I am in danger in the future, you too can lend a hand and help me." Emperor Li raised his eyebrows and looked at Li Yunxin for a while, and suddenly laughed again. "Oh, you want to be my friend, not my subordinate. You have some tricks. But what can you do for me?" Li Yunxin also laughed. "Your majesty, since you like ghosts and hate the Xianmen and demons, why don't I kill most of them in a few days? What do you think, your majesty?" Chapter 399. Emperor Li snorted. "Although you have some tricks up your sleeve, your words are a bit too arrogant. If you want to use such words as an excuse, and don't want to work with me, you can just turn around and leave. For the sake of brother Liu and the tiger demon, I won't make things difficult for you." Li Yunxin smiled again. "Your majesty, you can ask brother Xingyang. When I was in the city of Wei, I told him that I could help him unlock the seal of the abandoned palace. At that time he didn't believe me, so I removed the seal. I also told him that I could get out of the situation of death and get a new life. He didn't believe me either, but now he can see the result. I never lie about this kind of thing." Emperor Li frowned and turned to look at Liu Xingyang. Liu Xingyang whispered something in his ear. Emperor Li listened and thought for a while. Then he raised his head. "Humph. I'll take it that you are telling the truth. What do you want from me?" Li Yunxin paced a few steps and turned around. "I don't want anything at the moment. I just want to have one more friend, one more escape route. But since your majesty has asked, then what I want to know is, what kind of fortuitous encounter did your majesty have to regain your cultivation after being severely injured, and even learn this kind of magical power?" Emperor Li had gathered so many ghosts, and this matter was originally the domain of the Black and White Yama lords. Even he could only capture souls because he had the metal chain that the White Yama lord had bestowed upon him. But this Emperor Li became a ghost cultivator for only a few months, but he already had such amazing magic. If his experiences were to be written down, it would definitely be a thrilling experience. Emperor Li was suddenly happy to hear this. His expression was like, "I have a big secret in my heart, but no one to tell. And now someone finally mentioned it." He laughed. "Are you curious about this? Ha 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 ha. You can't imagine what kind of adventure I have had." Emperor Li was a person who liked to do things according to his own temper when he was alive. After his death, his character was even more obvious. When he was happy, he was like a child. "I was seriously injured, so I went to the northwest. But I mistakenly entered a cave and saw something amazing inside. My divine abilities and cultivation are all thanks to that thing. As for what it is..." At this point, he hesitated triumphantly for a moment and looked at Li Yunxin from the corner of his eye. Those ghosts also seemed to be affected by his spirit and emotions, and they all let out whimpering sounds, as if they were adding to the fun. Unfortunately, the effect was not good. Instead, it was a gloomy fog. After showing off for a while, seeing that Li Yunxin had no intention of pursuing the matter, his interest waned, and he stopped laughing. Instead, he snorted, "As for what it is, I won't tell you now. If you can really help me accomplish what you said, then I will tell you." Li Yunxin smiled again. He only asked this to give Emperor Li a way out. It made him feel that he was asking for something. Otherwise, if someone suddenly jumped out and said that he wanted to give you a great fortune, who wouldn't be wary? Now that he had achieved his goal, he cupped his hands and said, "Then, I will take my leave." There are still many things to do. 10 days later, invite the 2 ghost emperors down the mountain. If I accomplish that thing, there will be many souls waiting for you two to collect. If I don't accomplish that thing, you two have nothing to lose. Saying this, he bowed again and turned to leave the ruined temple. Emperor Li didn't ask him to stay. He seemed to be thinking carefully about what he said. When Li Yunqin's breath went far away, he turned to look at Emperor Yi. This person's words. Brother, how much do you think he is telling the truth? LV Xingyang hesitated for a while. If he said something else, I would believe it. But what he said today, not to mention Brother Ji, even I can't be sure. If it was someone else, I would feel that he is arrogant and ignorant. But it is him. I can only say, let's wait and see. He paused and said, but there are still many souls in the mountain that we haven't collected. Li Yunqin killed the tiger monster tonight, and the demons will definitely restrain themselves temporarily. Let's get down to business and collect those souls first. When you and I achieve great success, we won't need to think about whose words are true or false anymore. Emperor Li nodded. Brother, you have thought it through. Very good, very good. Saying this, the 2 ghost emperors turned into chilly winds and whistled out. It was night. Stars twinkled in the night sky, accompanied by a crescent moon. Under the starry sky, Li Yunqin went north while the 2 ghost emperors went to the mountains. Li Yunqin walked for dozens of miles and came to the cliff. Looking down from the rock, the cliff and the ground were hundreds of meters apart. Mortals couldn't see the bottom. They could only see endless darkness. The mountain here was extremely high. The top of the cliff was surrounded by clouds like a sea of clouds. Li Yunqin stood on the rock and looked up at the starry sky. In this era, the starry sky was extremely clear. He not only saw the bright stars but also colors. The silver river in the sky was originally colorful, but it was rare to see it in his world. The familiar Milky Way and many familiar stars. This once again made him feel as if he had been in another world. If these were all familiar, where was he now? He stared at the night sky for a while and slowly focused his attention on a particularly bright star. He thought it was the North Star, but he gradually realized that the direction and brightness were wrong. After staring for a long time, he found that it was moving. With the whole sky as the background, the movement was very small and not eye-catching. But under such a dim moonlight tonight, with reference to a few similarly dim stars, he discovered that it was actually moving slowly but firmly. Li Yunqin stared at the stars for a quarter of an hour, and the star had moved half the distance of a finger. Considering that it was so far away from the ground, how frightening was its speed? He frowned slightly, and his expression changed. He realized that this star was very likely to be the Cloud Mountain. The Cloud Mountain moved high above the sky, looking down on all living beings. It was the ancestral court of Daotong and Kinzo cultivators, the supreme paradise in the hearts of the people. When people thought of the Cloud Mountain, they always said that it was a river of mercury and a palace of gold and jade. There were colorful clouds in the sky and divine birds flying all over. The ground was covered with lingji and immortal herbs, and precious and beautiful beasts played and chased each other, surrounding the immortals. But in reality, the Cloud Mountain was more like an inverted cone. Its tip was facing the earth, like an inverted conical mountain peak. From a very far distance, its surface was very smooth, and its shape was very regular. It was like a celestial had turned a water droplet upside down and cut it in the middle, leaving only the bottom half. But if one flew closer, they would realize that its surface was not smooth. It was like an ordinary mountain, its surface made of rough stone. However, there were many tiny holes hidden on the surface of the stone, as if there were a lot of bubbles. But each bubble was a room, or an entrance. These numerous entrances and exits were connected to even more passageways within the mountain, forming countless rooms, halls, and stone chambers. Some were even hundreds of meters high, but compared to the entire Cloud Mountain, they were merely palaces the size of grains of sand and stones. As for people and cultivators, compared to this enormous floating mountain, they were nothing more than the tiniest speck of dust. Cultivators and a large number of servants lived on this mountain, but very few people went to the top. Such a vast mountain peak was actually a boundless plain. Its surface area was comparable to the capital of a small country, and in the center of this boundless plain, there was only a single room. This room stood on the barren plain, with narrow windows on all four sides. Warm yellow light shone through the window, casting a fan-shaped shadow on the rough stone floor, bringing the plain a hint of stingy vitality. But if one looked closer, they would find that this room was just like the Cloud Mountain. It looked small, but in fact it was extremely majestic and towering. Those seemingly narrow windows, each one was as tall as two people. The windows seemed to be inlaid with the most precious colored glass, sparkling and translucent, allowing one to see the situation inside the room at a glance. Inside the room, there were nearly 30 people, to be exact 28 people. The floor of this room was snow white, as if it was paved with mutton-fat jade. The four walls were also snow white, and the walls were lit with everlasting lanterns made from talismans. But there was no roof. But the cold air high up in the sky could not invade this room. It was repelled by some invisible force. 28 people sat in the center of this room, like 28 small black dots on the snow-white ground. From the outside, the light inside the room was warm yellow, but in the eyes of these 28 people, the light inside the room was constantly changing. This was because of the sky above their heads. The sky they saw in this room was different from the sky seen anywhere else in the world. There were countless fireworks in the sky, as if it was a festive night in the mortal world. But those weren't fireworks or firecrackers. They were giant rocks that came from a higher and deeper space. The giant rocks flew towards the Cloud Mountain at a terrifying speed, but were blocked by an even more powerful force, and exploded in the sky. The light from the explosion was like lightning, and the rumbling sound caused the ground to tremble slightly. It seemed that as long as one of them broke through that barrier, the Cloud Mountain would be completely destroyed in an instant. But the 28 people in this room all knew that such a scene had already happened several tens of thousands of years ago. In such a long history, the Cloud Mountain had always been moving steadily in the sky, never making any mistakes. The powerful power of the Tao kept all the terrifying invaders at bay. No matter what the cultivators of the Cloud Mountain thought or did, the Cloud Mountain itself had indeed protected this world for several tens of thousands of years. An old man with white hair and beard looked up at the bright light in the sky for a while, then sighed. This is already the 6th time since last month, until today. 34 days, and only 6 days of rest. It has never stopped. Has this ever happened before? Chapter 400. Sitting beside the old man was a young man. He had light golden hair, a high nose and deep eyes, wearing a black robe. Looking at him, he was actually a Di person from Takaro country in the northwest. There were Di people in Daotong and Kinzo, but their numbers were very few, and it was rare to see such a handsome man. The man snorted. When we were up there, did we not see enough? There's nothing to worry about. It's just that it's raining. After a few more days it would stop. But think about how to deal with those Taoists. Another yellow-robed woman continued his words. These few days, we have already cleaned up most of the people in Langya Grotto Heaven. The remaining 2 true realms escaped into the depths of Yunshan. We can't find them immediately, but they won't cause much trouble. If we say that Langya Grotto Heaven colluded with demons, who would dare to protect them? But the rest? There are still more than 70 sect leaders and sect masters on Yunshan who are not our people. Among them, there are about 30 or so who don't care about worldly affairs. And the other 30 or so are from the outer sect. They are smarter. If we are talking about trouble, they are the real trouble. Even though there were 28 people in the room, it was not noisy. When one person spoke, the others listened quietly, without a hint of urgency. It was as if they were already used to waiting and waiting for long periods of time. So they had developed a leisurely temperament, and didn't mind paying more patience. The woman paused, then said, in a few days, Yunshan will fall into Tongtian Lake. The demons will also gather at Manwan Mountain. I heard that all 9 dragon sons are out, surrounding Tongtian Lake from 3 sides, and there are hundreds of thousands of demons gathered. This kind of battle array can be considered unprecedented, right? I think it's because the female dragon in the east has been weakening day by day for some unknown reason. However, the 9 dragon sons that she has bestowed upon her are gradually growing in power and are dividing her power of faith. Thus, she has decided to let her few dragon sons lead the demons of the world, to come like moths to a flame, and ask us to eliminate a portion of them for her. Then, our Yinshan is about to fall into Tongtian Lake. The yellow-robed woman said in a soft voice. Therefore the calamity is, those outer sanctum sect masters and sect masters always think that they have to shepherd the people, that they are the legitimate rulers of the world. What should we do to make these people from Daotong and Kinzo die even more, and die even faster, so that this so-called Xianmen Orthodox Tao falls apart? After saying all this, she straightened her body and sat down again. It was as if he had opened a topic for today's discussion. After a while, an old man in a green robe straightened his body. Isn't there still that Li Yunqin? After saying this, he paused for a moment. Thus, many people revealed doubtful expressions, as if they had never heard of this name before. Or even if they had heard of it, they didn't take it to heart and didn't have a deep impression of it. The green-robed old man cleared his throat, and in the same slow and gentle tone, briefly recounted what Li Yunqin had done. Finally he said, I heard that he also went to the sweeping mountains. I also heard that he had a falling out with that hatred, and is currently heading to Tongtian Lake. Everyone think about it. What is he going to do at Tongtian Lake? The question was asked but no one answered. Some people were thinking, while others didn't want to answer this question. After waiting for 3 to 4 breaths, the white-haired old man who spoke first said, This Li Yunqin. In my opinion, we can use him. He raised his hand and stretched out a finger. He used to be a human, and now he is the Dragon 9 Sons. I also heard that he doesn't get along with hatred, so he definitely can't stay among the demons. The weakest dragon son will definitely be coveted by the other dragon sons. Therefore, even though he is a fiendish demon, and is surrounded by fiendish demons, the situation around him is very dangerous. Then now that he is heading to Tongtian Lake, he should be looking for us. In the past he liked to sit back and reap the benefits of others. Looking at it now, it is most likely the same idea. After saying this, some people nodded slightly, expressing their agreement. The old man stretched out a second finger. Secondly, does anyone know who his original body's bloodline is related to? He asked this, but didn't seem to want the others to answer. Instead, he quickly pointed at the yellow-robed woman, and then at himself. It is Yumi, the bloodline of this body's original owner. You should know, the original owner of this body got married 3,000 years ago, and gave birth to a Dao child. After that Dao child entered the world, he left behind a family with the surname Shangguan, the royal family of Wei. Until now, the last woman of the Shangguan family is Li Yunqin's mother, Shangguan Yu. She eloped with Li Chunfeng of the painting sect and gave birth to him. Thus to him, he is the only bloodline left in this world by the two of us, the two saints. Because of this, if he is coming for us, we can make an issue out of it. The yellow-robed woman thought for a while, and suddenly smiled. I'm afraid we don't even need to make an issue out of it. 3,000 years of bloodline, how thin has it become? He is a cold person by nature, and wouldn't care about this. Even if he remembered, he would only think of using it. This time, he came to Tongtian Lake and Mount Rushing Cloud, I think. No wonder he wants to use some method to win the trust of Daotong and Kenzo. After that he will reveal all the secrets of the demons, so that the people of Daotong and Kenzo can wage war against the demons. This is the same goal as us. We want to purge Daotong and Kenzo. As for this Li Yunqin, he probably lives a hard life amidst the strife of the various powers, and thus hopes that the world will be in chaos, so that he can take a breather. Then, we can push the boat with the current and fulfill his wish. After the yellow-robed woman finished speaking, the white-haired old man continued. He frowned slightly. But this Li Yunqin won't do this for free. He definitely has a plan, and wants to profit from it. He is only a true state, and is not a cause for concern. But I'm afraid that after he benefits from this matter, he will become even more dangerous. These two people, at the peak of Yunshan, in the holy lands of Daotong and Kenzo, talking about how to cause Daotong to fall apart. Yet the people around them were calm, and did not find it strange at all. Hearing his words, the yellow-robed woman sighed slightly. That's right. He really is a character that is rarely seen in hundreds of years. Even though he is inconspicuous now, I'm afraid that in the future, he will stir up the world. In my opinion, after using him this time, it would be best to get rid of him. A dam of 1,000 li can be destroyed by an ant's nest. We have all heard of that person's story. Didn't that person in the past also rely on his own strength to shake the entire world? When she mentioned that person, the white-haired old man's face also revealed a leisurely and fascinated expression. But other than the two of them, the other 26 people in the room all had different expressions. Some were disgusted, some were despising, some were hateful, and naturally, there were also those who were indifferent. At this time, the golden-haired, black-robed man beside the white-haired old man suddenly sneered. That person? Humph. Do you think that this Li Yunxin can compare to that person? The white-haired old man and the yellow-robed woman both froze, and did not immediately speak. It seemed that they were slightly afraid of this D-man. After a while the old man then said, "This? I heard that person's story, and know that he has brains and divine powers. But now that I look at this Li Yunxin again, I only feel that his brains are better than that person's. As for divine powers, compared to the same period, he is also better. You too, what do you know?" The golden-haired man interrupted his words, and straightened his body. What kind of brains and divine powers do you think he is relying on? The 28 people sat in a circle in the room, and it seemed that they did not have any hierarchy. At first, the white-haired old man and the yellow-robed woman talked the most, and seemed to be the leader of the conversation. But now, seeing the disdainful expression on the golden-haired man's face, and the other 25 people's different expressions, it turned out that the status of this old man and the woman among these 28 people was not the highest, but rather slightly lower. Because of this, they were asked to talk about things that other people did not want to talk about, and were too lazy to talk about. Now, when they heard the golden-haired man's retort, the two froze for a moment, and then fell silent. They could only listen to him. The golden-haired man continued. This Li Yunxin, humph. I have been paying attention to him for a while. If you compare him to that person, in terms of intelligence and resourcefulness, this Li Yunxin is far better than that person. What does that person know? He only knows how to be hot-blooded. If he was not lucky, he would have died a long time ago. In terms of divine powers, ha ha ha. The golden-haired man laughed coldly. Is there any comparison between the world of the past and the world of the present? Nowadays, if an emptiness realm Taoist priest or swordsman were to go back to the past, they would be extraordinary figures. Li Yunxin's current strength is already comparable to that person's when he was in the middle or late stage. However, the reason why that person was able to achieve great things was not only because of his intelligence and strength, but also because of his heart. The golden-haired man stretched out his hand and pointed at his chest. Let's not talk about other emotions, and only talk about him. He has a heart that embraces the world. This kind of person is seen as stupid by others. He only does things with brute force. He only knows how to charge forward and doesn't know how to retreat. He also doesn't know how to be like this Li Yunxin, who is opportunistic. However, because of this, he was able to drill through the iron curtain and create a path. Everyone, do you still remember? That person endured humiliation for 10 years and bore all the blame and criticism before he finally succeeded. Everything he said was praise for that person. However, his tone was very strange. He was gnashing his teeth, as if he had a deep grudge against that person. However, there was a hint of awkwardness in this grudge. It was as if this grudge against that person was not justified. The remaining 25 people all had the same expression. On the contrary, the white-haired elder and the yellow-cloaked woman seemed to be at a loss. It was as if the 26 people in this room had personally experienced the things that that person, the golden-haired man, spoke of had done. Only the two of them had heard about it through hearsay. After saying this, the golden-haired man paused. He raised his head and looked at the sky. Unknowingly, the fireworks in the sky had already dissipated. The night sky became calm and clear once more. However, the moon could not be seen here. One could only see the dazzling stars and an even deeper void. He looked for a while and lowered his head again. His tone was a little calmer. As for this Li Yunxin, he is very smart and capable. However, he lacks a heart. In this kind of world, without a heart that moves forward courageously, one cannot achieve great things. Without a heart that embraces the world, one cannot achieve great things. What he pursues, to put it nicely, is to live a carefree and unfettered life. To put it bluntly, it is actually aimlessness, a lack of responsibility and no courage. Such a person, how can he be mentioned in the same breath as that person? The golden-haired man sneered again. Therefore, since there are very few people that can be used, we should keep him. This time, when he succeeds, he will be proud of his intelligence and wisdom. We can then use him for other things. He will even think that he is clever and resourceful. The others did not express any objections to what he said, but they did not look at him in agreement, more like indifference. After the golden-haired man made this decision, the white-haired old man and the yellow-robed woman frowned slightly and looked at each other. Then they sighed in their hearts and did not say anything. If there were Daotong or Kinzo sect leaders or headmasters present, they would definitely be stunned, because this white-haired old man and the yellow-robed woman were the two sages of the world today. The old man was the sage of calligraphy, and the woman was the sage of sword. They were supposed to be the supreme figures of the world, the figures closest to the celestial being. But at this moment, they were sitting together with these people, listening to their sneers, and they did not dare to show the slightest displeasure on their faces. As for these 26 people, the sect leaders and headmasters of the Cloud Mountain could not recognize them. But even if they could not, the low-level disciples of their sects might be able to. Among the large number of mortal servants living on the Cloud Mountain, they would occasionally see these people's faces. They did not personally serve anyone, but mostly appeared as managers. They only communicated with the cultivators through the mortal servants. But today, they occupied the highest peak of the Cloud Mountain, looking indifferently and proudly at the supreme existences in the hearts of the cultivators of the world. The two sages. These people called the organization they belonged to the Freemasonry. Chapter 401. Li Yunxin knew that there were a total of 414 elders in the Freemasonry, but he didn't know that tonight, at this moment, when he was staring at the slowly moving Cloud Mountain in the sky from the edge of the cliff, there were 28 elders of the Freemasonry gathered at the peak of the Cloud Mountain. It was also hard to imagine how the 26 of them looked at the two saints. The golden-haired man commented on Li Yunxin, and everyone was speechless. After a moment of silence, the yellow-robed woman, the sword saint, coughed lightly and began the second topic of the day. Since everyone has made up their minds, let's talk about the second matter today. As she spoke, she looked at the expressions of the elders present. Right now, between Daotong and Kenzo, 11 of the 36 Heavenly Cave sect masters are our people. The leaders of 25 of the 72 sects are our people. Of the remaining 72 sect masters and sect masters, 30 don't want to get involved in the affairs of the world. These can be sent to the capitals of the various countries before the war with the demons. They can protect the emperors of the human world, so that they won't be killed by the demons and become ghost cultivators. There are also 32 sect masters and sect masters of the outer sections. They have always wanted to completely eliminate the demons and spread the word that this war is a war that concerns the fate of the Xianmen. Many cultivators have been bewitched by them, and their emotions are unstable. Although we also have 36 people, the majority of them are sect masters. We don't have an advantage compared to them, but it's not like we can't fight. The sword saint said softly, and changed the topic. The sword saint said softly, and then changed the topic. But it's still not safe. We have to consider everything. For example, the sect master of the Wuyan sword sect, Jing Guangzi, was seriously injured when he tried to stop Li Yunxin at the border of the Qing kingdom. He hasn't recovered yet. The golden-haired man interrupted her. What number is Jin Guangzi? The sword saint answered without hesitation. Number 50. Shi Liangzi. The other person, who had been resting with his eyes closed, only opened his eyes now. He seemed to be interested in this matter and said lightly, "Oh, it's already number 50? The sword saint turned to him. "It's already number 78. Platinum Quantum." Shi Lizhu, who possessed the golden photon, had already entered the world 130 years ago. He had been operating in the 5-star sword sect for a long time, and had made many contributions. Therefore, I think this person can still be used. If the elders have no objections, I think we can help her recover her cultivation. I can even help her advance to the next level. When the elder heard this, he closed his eyes again. Since it's already the 78th, what's there to pity about the 50th 130 years ago? After saying this, he said no more. The sword sage was stunned, and turned to look at the golden-haired D-Run. This golden-haired D-Run looked very much like the person who was elected by the 26 people to be the decision-maker. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head and said, "I know your background. So the two of you sympathize with these people. Oh. But think about it, number 1 Qing Liangzi wasn't very successful in the first place. But because he was number 1, there was still some commemorative value to him. So he stayed and released him to do something. And the result? He was killed by Li Yunxin in the city of Wei. Then Li Yunxin knew about us from that night. And then, he set a trap, and gave a man the recipe for gunpowder, of some sort, and he was killed at once. Who did it?" The sword sage coughed. "Number 15. Lin Liangzi." D-Run snorted and shook his head. "Number 15. Humph. He set a trap and he immediately fell into it. Aren't you shocked by this level of information exposure? Those before the 60th can almost be said to be failures and defective products," he said while looking at the sword sage and the sage of calligrapher. "The two of you are lucky to possess the flesh of this sage. The rest originally had obsessions. After our tempering, our obsessions became stronger, no different from lunatics. Previously we were short of manpower, so these could barely be used. But now, since the quality of the finished products after the 60th is getting more and more stable, more powerful and more obedient, let's not bother with those defective products. Continue to use those that can be used. Don't waste resources like the gold photon. That is useless. The people below are watching us more and more closely, and the people above have cut off contact with us. The things in our hands are almost less every time we use them. You have to be careful." The sword sage was silent and did not speak. The white-haired sage of calligrapher was also silent for a while and sighed. "Master D, you are wrong. The word D in the D people was originally a contemptuous name for the foreign kingdoms in the northwest by the countries in the east. But this D person's name was Master D, and he did not seem to mind it. Instead, he liked it very much. But this young Master D did not seem to expect that the sage of calligrapher would oppose his opinion. After a slight daze, he frowned. "What did you say?" The sage of calligrapher straightened his body. Among these 28 people, 26 were sitting with their legs crossed. Only the sage of calligrapher and the sage of sword were kneeling. At this moment, when he straightened his body, he looked a little taller than the others. And even his aura was stronger for no reason. He frowned and sighed again. "I know my origin. As for me, I was originally the 35th Zhao Liangzi. As for her, she was originally the 36th Ke Liangzi. The two of us were originally created by the elders." At first, the elders said that the reason why we chose the word Liangzi was that this word was actually the fundamental state of everything in the world, and it also meant that it was unpredictable and ever-changing. We were originally refined from human souls, so it was appropriate to choose this word. After saying this, the sage of calligrapher paused for a while and smiled. "But later, I found out that the reason why we chose this word was just a random idea of an elder. It was simple and convenient to use this word with the word before it, and it was easy to measure. As for the word before it, there was no explanation. Another elder said that it was just taken from the words on a musical score, and arranged according to the number 1, 2, and 3. So I know that I am not an important person. The reason why she and I can have today's status and can become the 413th and 414th elders in the non-voting attendance tonight is just that we caught a good opportunity to possess the bodies of the two sages. The elders need the power of the two sages, so they think highly of us. Grandmaster D frowned again. What do you want to say? What I want to say is that the actions of the various elders will cause people's hearts to be bitterly disappointed. This time, the sage of calligrapher did not avoid his eyes, but looked tit for tat. In these many years, how many brothers have risked their lives for the association, and finally got seriously injured, and then were abandoned? Grandmaster D mentioned Qing Liangzi. When Qing Liangzi entered the human realm more than 26,400 years ago, he also made great achievements for the association. At that time, how many elders did we have? Less than 100. What was Qing Liangzi's cultivation level at that time? It was far higher than the true state. However, he experienced many battles, and finally became a lonely soul that no one cared about. Only when someone remembered him did they tell him to do so. There are many people who had the same experience as him. I can't bear to see them in their eyes. Grandmaster D said that their temperament is extreme, and they are like lunatics. Grandmaster D, did you become a lunatic when you entered the human realm? Or did you become a lunatic after experiencing many tortures? The sage of calligrapher paused. Today there will be a great war, and it is the time to use people. If we abandon people like Qing Liangzi, who have made many contributions in the future, will we be alone? When Diren heard this, he tilted his head slightly and smiled. His smile was helpless and disdainful, as if he was an adult who was listening to a child talking about many childish and pitiful things that he did not need to worry about. However, the sage of calligrapher did not care about his attitude, and only continued. After she and I became elders, the elders once told us that our Freemasonry should be in the same boat. What we need to do is to save this world, and to deal with the upcoming world calamity. She and I have been elders for 1,000 years, but no one has told us what the world calamity is. That's fine, but if we want to save this world, what are we saving? Wasn't he trying to save all the lives in this world, and all the people here? If we abandon them and the common people, leaving only a bare and lonely world, are we only going to save a few hundred of us? What's the point? What will it be like? The sage of calligrapher paused. Horror of loneliness. His emotions burst out. He said so many words from the bottom of his heart that seemed to have been hidden for many years. However, the moment the words lonely and terrifying left his mouth, the smile on Diren's face, which had been smiling lightly, suddenly disappeared. He opened his eyes wide in an instant, turned his head to stare at the sage of calligrapher, and his face turned blue. Horror of loneliness? His eyes became extremely cold, and his momentum was not inferior to that of the sage, and even stronger. Do you know what horror of loneliness is? Then he stretched out his hand and drew an arc in the room. Who here doesn't know better than the two of you what horror of loneliness is? Hearing what he said, the elders who were just sitting there were finally moved. Subtle emotions appeared on their faces. But this time, it wasn't because they didn't care about it. It was more like they were trying their best to suppress their emotions so that they wouldn't show up. The sage of calligrapher and the sage of sword were stunned. They knew these elders. The elders might have some things that they were not good at, but in terms of patience and holding back their emotions, no one could be better than them. But now even they were moved by these 4 words. What on earth had they experienced? But Grandmaster D continued to frown and sneer. You too, Humph, care about the common people? Ha! I didn't know that you were such noble people. You said that they are brothers? Ha ha! In this case, since you are willing to be brothers with them, and are willing to sympathize with their emotional position, then just do it. From now on, the two of you are expelled from the Patriarch Society. Grandmaster D looked at the sage of calligrapher and the sage of sword coldly. We'll see what happens in the future. The time limit is uncertain. The sage of calligrapher and the sage of sword looked at each other. It seemed that they didn't expect that his words would lead to such a serious consequence. But they just kept silent for a while. After a moment of silence, they saw the expressions on the other elders' faces. No one objected. So they took a deep breath and stood up. They walked to the front of Grandmaster D, who was sitting upright, and bowed to him. Please reconsider. After saying this, they turned and walked to the northwest corner of the big house. Without any movement, a door opened, and inside the door was a spiral staircase. The staircase seemed to be made of fine steel, but after a long time, there were some traces of rust on the edge, but the rest of the staircase was still shiny. The two sages walked down the staircase slowly, and the door closed behind them. Grandmaster D watched them go. When the sound of their footsteps disappeared, he let out a sigh of relief. We did a stupid thing. As soon as the two sages left the house, the temperament of the others changed subtly. Originally, they were sitting upright arrogantly and silently, as if they didn't want to talk to them. But at this moment, the arrogance and silence were gone, and they showed more vivid emotions. Everyone seemed to heave a sigh of relief, and they even spoke a little more. It was indeed a stupid thing, another person said, frowning. Another person said with a frown, after all, the two of them are different species, and shouldn't be accepted into the patriarch society. But now that they know some of the things, they are not as respectful to us as before. They even dared to say such things today. This matter must be handled carefully. After all, the two of them are grand supreme level martial artists. Humph. Who can we blame? Another person snorted coldly. We should have used these two bodies in the first place. But no one was willing, so we could only choose two wandering souls to be attached to. Now it's good. Nurturing a tiger is a recipe for disaster. The wandering souls are already at number 78, and they are getting stronger and stronger. In my opinion, we should immediately stop the production of wandering souls. Once these two people go out of control in the future, and the wandering souls also turn against us, our efforts will be in vain again. But another person said lazily, this kind of thing is not something we can decide. Stop the production of wandering souls? It's equivalent to cutting off one of our own arms. Are you sure you want to do this kind of thing at this time? This year is already the 1132nd year. In another 68 years, our rotation will be over. Let's leave this matter to the next round of people. We have been busy enough in the past 1,000 years. After the departure of the two sages, these 26 elders showed astonishing liveliness. The whole room was at once in an uproar. They argued for a long time, but could hardly agree on what they were going to say. Instead, Grandmaster D, who was the most talkative when the two sages were here, became silent now. He quietly listened to the conversation of the other 25 elders. After an hour, he suddenly clapped his hands hard. Have you all forgotten why we have to destroy the celestial sect at this time? He said loudly. It's because we have reached an unprecedented crisis in the past 50,000 years. It's precisely because of this crisis that we have to reduce the variables in this world and strangle the celestial sect, which is gradually getting out of control. At this time, do you all still want to live the remaining decades in peace and hand over responsibility and your fate to the next round of people? That black Bai Yanjun is already trapped down there. Don't you know how dangerous the situation is? Do you all want to sleep again in this situation, and then wait, or live in the dream, or die in the dream? He stood up and looked around at the people in the room. The people in the room also quieted down because of his previous words. So he said at last, have you forgotten? The last time we handed over our fate to others, what happened? Do you all want to experience it again? So everyone was silent. After a few breaths, Grandmaster D slowly lowered his voice. Then I suggest. First, eliminate the main force of the celestial sect. Then stop the production of wandering souls, and observe the existing wandering souls. If there are any uncontrollable tendencies, eliminate them immediately. Then we will carry out the second phase of the plan. Hearing his last words, the people in the room looked at each other in dismay. After a while, someone whispered, only us? More than 400 people? That's impossible. Grandmaster D sneered. Impossible? What that person did, in the beginning, was it possible? If we lack someone like him, then let me be the one. Because of his words, the people fell silent again. But no one objected to him. About an hour later, the light in the big room was extinguished. The plane at the top of Cloud Mountain fell into darkness again. The huge Cloud Mountain continued to move in the sky. Chapter 402. The Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword were originally a pair of Taoist companions 3,000 years ago. They experienced a lot of things that people in the secular world had to go through. But in the end, they were separated like any other couple in the secular world. The Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword did not have Taoist names, because after entering the Grand Supreme Realm, their Taoist name was Sage. In the past, when there were several sages, they were distinguished by their names in the secular world. In this generation, there were few talents in Daotong and Kenzo. In the past 3,000 years, there were only 2 sages, so this name was exclusive to them. The Sage of Calligrapher's secular name was Su Yusong, and the Sage of Sword's secular name was Zhuamuja. But these 2 names were naturally not the real names of the Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword. But what were the original names of the 2 wandering souls that possessed the bodies of the Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword? Xiaoliangzhu and Kuliangzhu. They themselves did not know. So in private, like now, they called each other by this name. The holy palace of the Sage of Calligrapher and the Sage of Sword in Cloud Mountain was hidden among countless roads and halls that led in all directions. It was not like what mortals imagined, a fairyland surrounded by auspicious clouds and precious birds. But there was one thing in common: it was incomparably vast. This holy palace was actually bigger than a small city, although it was an inconspicuous little bubble compared to the entire Cloud Mountain. It was nearly 100 miles long, 100 miles wide, and a few miles high. It was not something that mortals could see, but it was not dark. Light shone down from the top of the sky, as bright as the sun. On the ground, there were shade-like green grass, towering trees, and winding rivers. It was clearly a small world. Flocks of birds flew up from the lush forest, passed through the mist in the forest, and flew into the air. They were flying over a floating mountain. This mountain was very similar to Cloud Mountain, so it was called Little Cloud Mountain. On this floating Little Cloud Mountain, there was a magnificent palace. This was the holy palace of the 2 sages. Many cultivators of Cloud Mountain might not be able to see this holy place in their entire lives. Those who had the opportunity to explore this place could not stay for too long. This vast space was exclusively enjoyed by 2 or several people for thousands, or even tens of thousands of years. However, at that moment, the 2 masters of the palace did not care about such a marvelous scenery. "You've been implicated." The white-haired master of calligrapher patted on the railing. This railing faced the cliff of Little Cloud Mountain, and below it was a snake-like river. Day and night were always bright in this vast space, so that the river glistened in the sunlight, making it look even more like a huge snake. He stood with his hands behind his back and leaned against the railing, squinting his eyes to look into the distance. For someone like him who had the grand supreme divine power, no one could tell what he saw. The Sword Saint stood beside him and sighed. "You and I both know that this day will come sooner or later. Over the years, we have gradually come to understand their methods. The 2 of us have always been regarded as creations by them. The only reason they asked us to attend the Council of Patriarchs is because of our cultivation bases. Up until now, I don't regret my status as an elder. I'm just thinking, why did we do it in the first place?" The Sage of Calligraphy chuckled. "Why did you do that? Hee. At that time, did we know anything about righteousness, emotion, and responsibility? We are all dead souls that have been refined into wandering souls. When we first entered the human world, we only thought about doing things for the association, and didn't care about anything else. Even now, when I occasionally think about the past, I still feel scared. I also feel strange." He shook his head slightly. "Most people live slowly and cultivate their conscience. The 2 of us, on the other hand, slowly cultivated our conscience after living for a long time." He spoke passionately in the big house at the top of the mountain. Unfortunately, he was driven out of the meeting by Grandmaster D halfway through his speech. Now that he returned to the Holy Palace, the topic was brought up by the Sword Saint again. It seemed that he could not stop for a while. "As for our conscience, we should thank these 2 bodies. The sage of calligraphy looked down at himself, and there was a moment of confusion in his eyes. The two of us originally sneaked into the Daotong Kenzo and served the two sages separately. Then we got their bodies. These bodies are the bodies that lead the world's Xianmen and Orthodox Tao. The respect and praise of those cultivators in Mount Yunshan gave birth to our hearts. It's not that I'm used to those praises. It's that the longer I'm a fake sage, the more I know about the world. Therefore, I understand more and more that the Xianmen take care of the world is not empty talk. I also know that our every move is related to the billions of lives in the world. Shroud billions of lives. Even if it's a heinous person, as long as he's not a lunatic. Once we carry such a heavy burden on our shoulders, how can we act like before? The two of us wandering souls take shelter in this body. But after taking shelter for a long time, we're forced to be embedded by these responsibilities. Now you ask me, am I Xiufeng Liangzi or the Sage of Calligraphy? I don't know either. At this point the Sage of Calligraphy frowned. He clenched his hand on the railing tightly, but didn't leave any finger marks on the railing. Therefore, when I mentioned golden light today, I was thinking, the elders in the society said that our Freemasonry is to save the world. They also said that the Daotong and Kenzo of the Xianmen are a group of living dead who don't care about the lives of the common people. They've gone on the wrong path and are about to turn into demons. They also said that our Freemasonry is the right path to inherit the will of heaven. Therefore, there are many methods that Daotong and Kenzo might not have. I used to believe in these things, but after hearing what he said today, shroud between the Xianmen and the Freemasonry, which one do you think is the right path? The Sage of Calligraphy didn't answer him immediately. After a while, when a flock of birds flew in front of her, she said in a low voice, "What do you want to do?" Because of her words, the Sage of Calligraphy's tone also became low, as if he was afraid of being heard by a third person. We have to tell these things, what they said about golden light today to the others. The Sage of Calligraphy said slowly, "We used to be wandering souls. After being saints for so many years, the other wandering souls hidden in the Xianmen have become closer to us. The elders have never taken us seriously, and the wandering souls should have known that a long time ago. Although they have obsession and madness, they are not fools. We have to be prepared." I asked them today, are we only going to save those 400 people? I'm not just saying this casually. These people can do it. The Sage of Calligraphy frowned. Working together, working together, working together. If the elders are not in the same boat with us, we can't drown obediently. Seize the boat, or board our own boat. This is my plan. The Sage of Calligraphy took a slight breath. If the two saints were really here, it would probably be difficult for them to have such vivid expressions and movements. However, the two saints were just wandering souls in a bag of skin. Their joy, anger, sorrow, and joy might be more distinct than those of the sect masters and sect masters. Both of our bodies belong to saints. The Sage of Calligraphy pondered for a while. The bodies of the Grand Supreme Realm, but the divine abilities we can use are limited. After all, we don't have the Tao heart and comprehension of the two saints. However, we are still considered powerful figures in this world. So the elders say that they value us or appease us, but they also made us elders. But Yusong, you have to know that the elders all have the cultivation of the Grand Supreme Realm. The Sage of Calligraphy frowned. 36 years ago, Grandpa D came to the sacred palace and saw the dual cultivation sword left by the former Sage of Calligraphy. He picked it up casually and played with it. That sword had its own spirituality and shot out a sword ray to stab him. But he was not hurt at all. This is indeed the body of the Grand Supreme Sage. The 412 elders are all like this. Yusong, if you want to seize the boat or board your own boat, don't you think our strength is a little too weak? The Sage of Calligraphy turned to look at her. After watching for a while, he said in a low voice, "They do have the body of the Grand Supreme Realm. But the problem is, it has been more than 1,000 years. We have been with them for more than 1,000 years. Have you ever seen them use any of their divine abilities?" The Sage of Calligraphy frowned. "They always have to hide their tracks." "That's not true." The Sage of Calligraphy shook his head. "For example, You are a strong adult in the secular world, but now you have to pretend to be a child. Although you pay attention to everything, there will always be a flaw. For example, when you walk up to the steps, an adult can go up with a single step, but a child has to move step by step. Now this adult who's pretending to be a child is so strong and burly. Can he remember this all the time and never take a step forward? This cloud mountain is high and low, and there are many inconveniences in coming and going. But the elders, no matter how troublesome it is to do something, they always do it the way mortals do it. They have been hiding in the cloud mountain for more than 1,000 years, and I have never heard of anyone seeing through them. Do you really think people as arrogant as them will be so careful in daily life? The sage of calligraphy looked at him suspiciously. You mean, I have been observing and thinking for a long time. The sage of calligraphy's voice became deeper and deeper. I think the current situation of the elders is that they have the body of the grand supreme realm, but because of some restrictions, they can't use their divine abilities. That's why they value us so much. They don't hesitate to use their status as elders to bind us. That's why they have to create wandering souls. They say that they are helping them deal with trivial matters that they are too lazy to do. In fact, they have to rely on wandering souls. That's why I said these words today. What's the result? The sage of calligraphy sneered. They just expelled us. And this expulsion from the senior elders society is to see what happens next. They have never taken wandering souls seriously, but how are they treating us now? They are afraid of us, and they can't leave us. Think again. The elders said that there will be a terrible catastrophe in the future, and they want to save the world. Since this is the case, you and I are two sages and 30% of the Grotto Heaven sect is under the control of the Freemasonry. As long as we continue to lie dormant, the entire celestial sect will be replaced by us within 1,000 years. The celestial sect, which has been operating in the world for 50,000 years, has such a stable foundation and terrible power. If they can use it, why don't they use it to save the world? The sage of calligraphy paused and lowered his voice even more. Because they are afraid. They are afraid of the power that is too powerful and beyond their control. Chapter 403. The Sword Saint was silent for a while because of his words. At this time, a flock of birds flew over the foot of Mount Shaoyan. She reached out her hand and grabbed it. The birds, which were dozens of feet away, were caught in her palm. They kept flapping their wings an inch above her palm, but they couldn't fly out of her 5 fingers. Unlike the old sage of calligrapher, the Sword Saint looked very young. But she was a sage. No one dared to comment on her appearance, and there was nothing to comment on. The sage's unfathomable cultivation made her temperament change mysteriously. She could see her face clearly. She still had young skin, bright eyes, and soft lips. But she couldn't use these images to get a complete impression. She thought for a while. The sage of calligrapher frowned. You don't believe me? You've been secretly observing for 1,000 years. I feel the same way about many things. It can't be summed up by the word don't believe. The Sword Saint thought for a while and whispered, I believe you about the situation of the elders. But other things, I can't be as sure as you. We've been elders for 1,000 years. Until now, we still don't know what their purpose is, and where they come from. It's not wise to act rashly. In my opinion. She calmed herself down and looked at the bird in her palm. There's a compromise. After this battle with the demons, the decline of Xianmen is inevitable. You and I can't change the overall situation. But we can do something else. For example, rebuilding a Daotong or Kenzo. The sage of calligrapher frowned. The Sword Saint smiled. Listen to me. Now this Xianmen can't be saved. It's like a dying patient. 35 of the headmasters and the grand masters are our people. What about the rest? You can see that they are not interested in the affairs of the world. They only know how to cultivate. Some of them are a little involved in the world, and they don't know how to communicate. In fact, they are just a group of very powerful children. But Daotong and Kenzo said that the celestial beings asked them to shepherd the people. When the elders said that they had walked on the wrong path, they meant that the techniques that these cultivators cultivated, from cutting off all emotions and desires, all the way to the grand oblivion of emotions, They were all walking on the wrong path. They have lost all their emotions, so why would they care about the suffering of the people of the world? If you can't empathize with the suffering of the people, how can you shepherd them? Supreme oblivion. If the word oblivion only refers to forgetting emotions, don't you think it's weird? The highest realm of cultivation should not have such a simple and straightforward meaning. Her words seemed to have touched the sage of calligrapher. The old man sighed. That's right. Those low-level cultivators transcended various tribulations and got rid of one or a few distracting thoughts and emotions. It was indeed beneficial to their cultivation. However, the higher one's cultivation level was, the less human they were. They were no different from demons. On this point, the elders are not wrong. They have indeed walked the path of evil. But you and I have both cultivated in Daotong and Kenzo. However, we are cultivating as ghost cultivators, so we don't need to go through any tribulations. In fact, we are equivalent to demons. In this way of cultivation, our realm can't be promoted to supreme realm. So this is very strange, the Sage of Swords said seriously. Xianmen cultivated according to the righteous method passed down by the celestial beings, and cultivated themselves to be half human and half demon. The elders asked us to cultivate according to their method, but we couldn't be promoted to supreme realm. There must be a great way, but now, whether it is us or Xianmen, it is not the great way. Therefore, I think after the collapse of Xianmen, we may be able to gather some cultivators who have not completely abandoned their emotions and desires. In the name of the two sages, we can rebuild Daotong and Kenzo. We don't care about the affairs of the world, but first find the great way and find the real cultivation method. With this method, we can do more things and have more choices. The Sage of Calligrapher pondered for a while and raised his head to look at her. Then your choice is to board another boat. He thought again. I'm willing to do that. But the golden photon. The Sage of Sword waved his hand gently, so the bird that had been bound in her palm regained its freedom. In an instant, it reappeared among the flock of birds from her palm, completely unaware of what had just happened. The elders don't care about her, but we do. The Sage of Swords said softly. The longer we wandering souls live, the more things we know, and the more likely we are to be like the two of us and have more thoughts. The elders don't like this. Maybe that's why they don't care about them, and let them fend for themselves. But, now that we are the two sages, we have our ways. Didn't the cultivation of the golden photon decrease greatly, because her natal magic treasure was taken away? Then we should give her more magic treasures. This Xianmen will eventually be destroyed, so it's useless to keep it. She is in the real state, so she can be used more easily than Lu Ling. Maybe she will be stronger than before. As for Li Yunqin who hurt her, how do you want to deal with him? The Sage of Calligrapher was stunned at first, and then he laughed. Li Yunqin, do you really think I care about him? I mentioned him in front of the elders, just to let them know that there are many dangers around them, and they can't leave us. I also want to hear more about that person from Master D. By asking them to tell us more details bit by bit, we can only know more. As for Li Yunqin, you and I have been in Cloud Mountain for more than 1,000 years. Haven't we seen a few people more talented than him? He is just Li Yunqin. We used him as a chess piece to activate the whole situation, and we can continue to use him in the future. Watching him trick others into his little game, while he is in the big game. This is the only fun I have. After saying this, he suddenly waved his hand. A bright mirror immediately appeared in the void in front of him. But rather than a mirror, it was more like a window. Through this window, he saw a mountain surrounded by clouds and mist. It was strange. It was night when Li Yunqin looked up at Cloud Mountain from the edge of the cliff. The two sages talked about martial arts with the 26 elders of the Freemasonry at the peak of Cloud Mountain, and then returned to the Holy Palace to talk. All this time added up to only 4 to 6 hours. It should still be night outside. However, the scene shown in the window was that the sun was shining brightly, and the sun was leaning slightly to the west. It looked like it was just past noon. The Sage of Calligrapher casually flicked the mirror. Then the scene in the mirror changed rapidly. The continuous mountain range quickly drew closer. Finally, A mountain dotted with green pines and waterfalls appeared in the mirror. From a distance, the top of the mountain and halfway up the mountain were exposed in large areas, like rocks mixed with red, yellow, and white. However, as he got closer, he found that those were not rocks. The yellow ones were the roofs, the red ones were the pillars, and the white ones were the courtyard walls. They turned out to be many man-made buildings, stretching from halfway up the mountain to the top of the mountain. Many of them were hidden in the green trees. It was unknown how many houses there were, and how many people could live in them. If ordinary people in the secular world were lucky enough to come to the foot of the mountain and look up at this scene, they would probably shout, "This is a fairyland." But in fact, this was not a fairyland. It was the mountain gate of the Five Serpent Sword sect, located 100 miles away from Little Rock Canyon in Yi Country. The scene in the mirror was fixed on the mountain peak, which looked like it was hidden in the clouds. The Sword Saint walked over and said in a low voice, "Junior sister, come." After about 3 breaths of time, a golden light suddenly shot out from a big house on the mountain peak. The golden light hovered in the air for a while, then plunged into the mirror. The next moment, the golden light flew out of the mirror and landed in front of the 2 saints. At this time, the golden light looked very haggard. There was a deep frown on her face. Although her hair was neat and tidy, it didn't have any luster. Instead, she looked like a puppet used in the mortal world for sacrificial ceremonies. As soon as she landed, she deeply lowered her head and didn't dare to raise it again. It was as if looking at the holy palace was a great sin. If Li Yunxin was here, he would realize that the golden light's current performance was very interesting. It wasn't strange for a cultivator from Daotong and Kinzhou to have such a performance when they saw the 2 saints. However, the golden light knew that the 2 saints in front of her were also wandering souls like her. They were also wandering souls and had the bodies of the 2 saints. Their magical powers far surpassed theirs, so it was reasonable for her to be respectful. However, the main emotion of the golden light now was fear, which was far more than respect. In fact, it could be said that she was afraid. She was afraid of something. But the Sword Saint and the calligrapher didn't seem to be surprised. The Sword Saint stretched out his hand and pinched the golden light's shoulder. The golden light didn't move at all, like the most docile and obedient child. It was completely different from the day when she fought with Li Yunxin. After pinching for a while, he sighed. "I told you. It's not something wandering souls like us should do to refine our natal magic treasures. Since we can dual cultivate and don't need to go through the heavenly tribulation, why do we need to rush? At this point, I have no other way." This was a bad news. However, the golden light actually let out a breath, as if she was relieved of a heavy burden. She lowered her head and said in a low voice, "It's my fault. It's my fault. When I return to the sect, I will cultivate diligently and quickly." Her tone was quick and hurried, as if she was in a hurry to leave the Saint Palace as soon as possible. The Sword Saint laughed and interrupted her. "But there is another way. Since you lost your natal magic weapon, I will give you some more. With these things at your disposal, you will only be able to fight with more strength than ever before. First, tell me, what treasure do you like?" The golden light said in a low voice, "It's all up to you, senior martial sister." After saying that, she seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly added, "Actually, my natal magic weapon, the glazed sword heart, has been brought back." "Brought back?" "Yes," the golden light said. "One of my disciples, whose Taoist name is Kong Tongzi, met Li Yunxin in the Endless Scroll Mountain. That Li Yunxin seemed to have fallen out with the demons and was heading towards the Tongtian swamp. He met my disciple and destroyed his cultivation, but gave him the glazed sword heart and told him to bring it back to the sect. This happened 3 days ago. I have been dealing with this matter these days, so..." The 2 saints looked at each other. "Ah, while we were talking, 3 days have passed." Chapter 404. It turned out that one day in the Cloud Mountain was equivalent to several days in the secular world. Let's not talk about why Jin Guang was so scared, or what kind of treasure the Master of Sword and the Master of Calligrapher were going to give her. They only said that Li Yunxin went down Manwan Mountain and went to Tongtian Swamp. looking at the earth from the cloud mountain. One only felt that the earth was empty and lonely, and there was little prosperity in the human world. Passing through the mountains and coming to the plain, they realized that the vision of the cultivators from a high place was also limited. In the vast wilderness, among the meadows and trees that stretched to the sky, there were a lot of hidden vitality. It was different from Mamwan Mountain. This plain had been the place where the people of Yi lived and worked since ancient times. Although there were not many big cities like Small Rock and the city of Wei, there were many villages and towns. At first, when the people of Yi saw the military escorting these things to Tongtian Swamp, they thought that there was going to be a war. Although people had not been in a war for hundreds or even thousands of years, they knew that war was a terrible thing. Every autumn, it was already a terrible disaster that the government runners from the counties and prefectures went to the countryside to demand the payment of taxes. How terrible would it be if those soldiers were involved? So the timid people fled early, ignoring the notices issued by the government to appease the people. But after a few days, he slowly realized that the soldiers who passed through the border were not that scary. It was not that they were all strict and impartial in military discipline. Instead, it was to say that even if these soldiers were to eat and drink, and even if there were occasional robberies, it was not as frightening as one would imagine. Therefore, some people who were reluctant to leave their homeland moved back one after another. Then more speculators who came from all directions also appeared. Most of them were merchants and peddlers who walked in the villages and towns all year round. After going down Mamwan Mountain and going to Tongtian Swamp, the distance was long. It would take a secular person nearly a month to get there. Although these mortal soldiers were only responsible for transporting the red soil to the assembly point in the middle of the plain, and then the cultivators would finish the rest, it would still take a few days. So many people wanted to eat and drink, so there were naturally business opportunities. As a result, many of the post houses and villages along the way became lively and prosperous. It was not known who came up with the idea, but it not only allowed these peddlers to earn money, but also solved the problem of resting and reorganizing many soldiers. Li Yunqin looked around as she walked. She walked for 2 days. Over the past 2 days, he had seen all kinds of people and heard many things. Perhaps it was because his state of mind had changed. Many things that used to be meaningless to him, now he could feel a subtle emotion when he listened to them. This feeling, it was as if a new world had suddenly appeared around him. Moreover, this new world had always existed. It was just that he had turned a blind eye to it. By noon of the 3rd day, he could already see his destination. The Cloud Mountain was about to land in the Heavenspan Swamp. But the cultivators guarding Skyspan Swamp were only a small portion of them. Most of the cultivators had set up camp in front of them. It was a 3-day journey from the winding mountain, which could almost be said to be right next to it. The soldiers from the south sent the red soil to this camp, and then the cultivators in the camp used their mana to shrink the ground and send it to heaven-reaching swamp. The camp of the cultivators was different from that of the mortal soldiers. In the distance, a tall tower could be seen standing dozens of miles away. It looked like it was hundreds of meters high. The tower was black, and there seemed to be some figures going in and out of the air. But in the middle, it was shrouded by clouds, and mortals could not see it clearly. In the past, the cultivators did not like to show off their miracles in front of mortals. But this time, it was probably the first time in many years that they showed their shocking power in front of so many mortals. As for the camp of the allied army of mortals, it was on the periphery of the tower, stretching for dozens of miles. There was a clear distinction between them, and there were strict banners. But in the periphery, the boundary was not so clear. Many peddlers and peddlers set up all kinds of stalls around the large camp, providing services and food. The daily consumption of food and daily necessities for such a large army was astonishing. Although these peddlers on the periphery could relieve the urgent need for a while, they could not solve the fundamental problem. But even so, business was still booming. The escorting soldiers stopped to rest when they arrived here. After resting, they would get up and catch up with the half-day journey to the camp of the Allied army on the periphery. So when Li Yunqin arrived here, what he saw was not the wilderness. It was almost a small city, although many of the huts were not close to each other, and most of them were dozens of steps away from each other. The advantage was the large number. He had seen the market in the city of Wei before. Here, the market in the city of Wei was probably magnified by thousands of times. Looking up, he could not see the end of it. Even the black tower built by the cultivators on the horizon seemed faintly discernible. The soldiers who arrived here for the first time were also shocked by such a scene, and people were stunned everywhere. However, the peddlers were busy killing pigs and sheep, cooking and frying, and seemed to be even more fearless than the soldiers. Li Yunxin took a few steps through the crowd. Her ears were filled with the clashing of armors, the shouts of soldiers coming and going, the cries of peddlers, and the sounds of food being poured into pots. After a while he saw different people. They were actually the low-level disciples of various sections. With the miraculous black tower in the distance, people were naturally more in awe of these cultivators. Wherever these low-level disciples went, people would automatically make way for them, and their voices also became quieter. It turned out that they were here to inspect the order. Although these arrogant low-level cultivators were not happy, but it did work. The soldiers bought food with silver or IOUs. It seemed that this situation had been going on for a long time. Li Yunxin realized that he had underestimated the means of Xianmen. He used to think that with such a large number of troops, the logistics problem was unsolvable. But seeing the situation in front of him, he realized that as time went by, the number of peddlers who heard the news should be more and more. Many countries in this world also valued agriculture and despised commerce, but not very seriously. This made the circulation of goods in this world far better than the ancient times he remembered. Maybe in a few days, these people who intended to take the opportunity to make a fortune could meet the daily needs of the army. But were these people not afraid of death? This place would become the front line of the war between Xianmen and the demons. With this question in mind, he went on, passing through two tumultuous groups of people, two monstrous heaps of bones and dung of fowls, ducks, cows, and sheep, and passing through a wood occupied by soldiers who were also taking a rest, until he came upon a wine shop at the foot of the hill. This wine shop was propped up with a few thick pieces of wood, and covered with thick cowhide. Inside were dozens of black porcelain jars with red paper with the name of the wine. There were 5 tables, and a number of benches outside. It looked like it was built in a hurry. Even the wooden splinters on the table had not been smoothed. There were other businesses next to the wine shop, and they all had more people than his family. Perhaps the officers of the army came here to restrain their subordinates, and not let them drink and cause trouble. So only 2 of the 5 tables were occupied. One of the tables was surrounded by 3 people. They only ordered a pot of light wine, and a plate of soybeans, drinking and chatting. Li Yunxin's hearing was excellent, so when he walked over, he heard the general gist of the conversation, and knew that these 3 people were also doing business nearby. In the afternoon, he was tired and came to take a breather. Others were doing business with the army, but the poor wine shop owner was doing business with his peers. On the other table was a man in blue. He looked like a young man in his early 20s, and although his clothes were not luxurious, they were still decent. There were 5 wine jars on the table in front of him, all of which seemed to be empty. So he was also tired, unable to drink, and fell asleep lying on his stomach. When Li Yunxin arrived, he heard the 3 people at the table talking about the army and Xianmen. Coincidentally, this wine shop could be considered quiet. So he picked a table and sat down, listening to the 3 people talk from afar. The boss was moving the wine jars in the cowhide shed, and did not see him, but he was not in a hurry. He wanted to know more information about these mortals, about these soldiers. Xianmen did not value these people very much, but in his view, these people were the foundation for success. After listening for about a quarter of an hour, he had a rough idea of what was going on. No wonder. Not only were these peddlers not afraid, they even flocked to this place. So it was because of what Xianmen said. In the hearts of the world, Daotong and Kinzo roughly represented the righteous path of the world. The righteous path was glorious, and the demons could only hide in the shadows. They were completely unable to fight against the celestials and cultivators. This was what mortals thought. So in the eyes of people like Li Yunqin, this was a great battle between the demons and Xianmen. But in the eyes of mortals, it was, the Cloud Mountain was going to land in Tongtian Swamp. This meant that immortals would descend, and the entire Tongtian Swamp would become an immortal realm. And outside Tongtian Swamp, the surrounding thousands of li would be filled with immortal qi. If mortals came here, even if they breathed in the immortal qi, they would be able to strengthen their bodies and prolong their lives. It was said that this saying was first spread among the people, because a Sendo accidentally leaked the secrets of heaven. After that, it was fermented by many people, and finally spread all over the world. Naturally, there were also people who knew about the demons. However, no one was worried about the demons. They gathered here, and were so close to the immortals on the Black Tower. How would the demons dare to show themselves? There was also a saying that this time the immortal mountain descended. It was because of the demons running amok in the world. So the immortals decided to eliminate them. So these bold peddlers came first. After a few days, maybe there would be other people with different purposes. Finally, maybe those who wanted to strengthen their bodies and prolong their lives would also come. The number of people here might be even more than the number of people in the Allied army. This situation was actually a bit familiar. Just as Li Yunqin heard this, he saw that the young man sleeping at the table beside him woke up. He only arched his back, and his head was still on the table. His arms touched the table randomly, and the empty wine jars fell to the ground, making crackling sounds. This sound startled the boss in the shed, and he hurriedly turned around. He saw the young man frown first, and then saw Li Yunqin, and his brows unfurrowed. He trotted over to greet Li Yunqin, and apologized. "I was really busy, so I just saw the honored guest. Would you like some wine to quench your thirst?" Li Yunqin didn't answer, but heard the young man at the table next to him vaguely call out, "Boss, bring wine." The boss only glanced at him, and then ignored him. But the young man raised his head at this moment, stretched out his hand, and slammed the table shouting, "Where's the wine? Where's the wine?" Li Yunqin saw his face, and felt that it was a bit familiar. This matter was a bit strange. He always had a photographic memory, and he would never forget anyone he saw once. But now that he saw this young man, he felt that he was familiar. But he couldn't remember where he had seen him. It was really strange. He frowned slightly, stared at the young man's face for a while, and asked the boss, "Why are you ignoring him?" The boss was slightly surprised. "Honored guests know him? I'm just curious. He looks like an old friend of mine." As Li Yunqin said this, he stretched out his hand and placed a few silver coins on the table. "I only need a cup of tea. What's wrong with this person?" The boss laughed. He put away the silver coins, glanced at the man and said, "Hey sir, honored guest, please don't think that I'm snobbish and neglectful. He's been eating and drinking here for a few days. When he first came, he had some money with him. Looking at his clothes, I thought he was just a young master who came to have fun. So I treated him very respectfully. But after 3 days, he ran out of money and refused to leave. He still stayed here and asked me to buy him wine on credit. I was afraid that he had some background, that he might be a secretary in the army, or a general or something like that. So I bought him 3 days' worth of wine on credit. But he's still here, and it looks like he's determined to bring this little business of mine to its knees." Li Yunqin laughed. "He drank your wine for 3 days. How could he run out of money? Did you cheat him?" The boss hurriedly waved his hand. "Honored guest, what are you saying? Honored guest, you don't know how this person drinks." Li Yunqin laughed again. "Oh." He reached into his sleeve, took out a gold leaf, and threw it on the table. "Then I'll treat him. You bring him wine. I want to see how he drinks." The boss was dumbfounded by his heroic manner. Even the 3 people at the other table stopped talking and looked at him with interest. So the boss went back to the shed and brought out 2 jars of wine. The boss was a short man with a sturdy build, and his arms were as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. Even so, it was a bit difficult for him to walk with 1 jar of wine on each side. It could be seen how big the jars were, and how heavy the wine was. He walked to the young man's table and put the jars on it, causing the ground to tremble slightly. Then he frowned at him and said in a rough voice, "Yesterday you were lucky to meet 2 soldiers who invited you. Today you're lucky to meet this honored guest. So drink as much as you want. Drink to your heart's content and leave quickly." The young man looked like he had drunk too much. He ignored the boss's words and didn't even thank Li Yunxin. He patted the jar, opened the seal and drank. But the jar was heavy, and he didn't seem to have much strength, so he tilted the jar slightly at first, letting the wine slowly overflow. He continued to drink with his mouth. In one breath, he drank for a quarter of an hour without stopping. Li Yunxin was slightly surprised. He had already investigated this person and knew that he didn't have any demonic power or spiritual power, and was just an ordinary person. But an ordinary person, drinking like this, he could be considered a strange person. Like this for another quarter of an hour. He drank half of the wine, and then stopped to wipe his mouth. But he didn't rest. He put down the jar, squatted under the table, and continued drinking. He looked surprised, but the 3 people at the other table weren't surprised. It seemed like they were used to it these days. The boss wasn't surprised either. He walked back, poured a cup of tea, and gave it to Li Yunxin. He picked up the golden leaf on the table and weighed it in his hand. He reached into his pocket and took out a pair of scissors. "These things of mine aren't worth this." The boss used his finger to measure the golden leaf, and then used the scissors to cut off a piece and put it into his pocket. Then put the rest on the table. "Take care of these honored guests." Then he looked at the young man and said to Li Yunxin, "Hey, he only calls himself Su Sheng. These days he doesn't talk much, only drinks. There are 2 jars on the table. It's not enough for him to drink. If he lets go, he can drink a dozen jars a day. But this wine of mine is a rare strong wine. I'm afraid he'll drink to death. So how can I let him do as he pleases? I've already received half a golden leaf from the honored guest, and I've given him 10 jars of wine. After he finishes, I can't give him any more today." After saying this, he said, "Does the honored guest want anything else?" Li Yunxin shook his head. "Go. I'll watch him to relieve my boredom." The boss naturally didn't know what was so interesting about Su Sheng. But since he heard Li Yunxin say that he wanted to relieve his boredom, he smiled and said casually, "It's fine if the honored guest wants to relieve his boredom. This Su Sheng looks like he doesn't have any other abilities, but he's a great drinker. You see, if these 2 jars of wine were poured into a person's body, they would explode. But he can sit here and drink without moving. Not to mention 2 jars. Even if it's 10 jars, he can still sit here and drink. It's very magical." But although he said it was magical, his feet were walking towards the tent. It seemed that he had seen too much these days, and was too lazy to watch. After the boss left, Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and stared at Su Sheng for another quarter of an hour. There was something strange about this person. His memory and intuition were rarely wrong. He must have seen this person before. But who was it? This Su Sheng seemed to be very different from the others. Normally, when a drunkard drank wine, he should be somewhat unrestrained. But at this moment, looking at his face, there was no expression. It was as if drinking was as natural and boring as breathing to him, and nothing that happened in the world around him could arouse his interest. He seemed to be surrounded by a layer of gloomy fog, as if all the tragic things in the world had come to him, causing him to lose hope and vitality, and even drowning his sorrows in wine was tasteless. Such a person, if he had seen him before, how could he not remember him? Li Yunxin frowned, but the next moment his eyes slightly widened. He remembered someone. Chapter 405. When he was trapped in Dongting, he met a strange old man in the lake. The old man called himself Su Wang. He left a deep impression on Li Yunxin. The reason why he left a deep impression was not because of his mysterious background, but because of his unique temperament. Li Yunxin once traveled to Dongting with Su Wang. The old man was very excited when he saw the scenery of Dongting. He told Li Yunxin that the seemingly ordinary lake, sky, and water were actually very unusual scenery. This made him sigh with emotion for a while, and almost shook his heart. Before that he had seen many demons. Some were as tender as water, some were sinister and vicious, and some were shrewd. Although they each had their own characteristics, what they had in common was that they were all very extreme in their temperaments. Only the old man was an exception. Li Yunqin had never seen a demon or cultivator as energetic and enthusiastic as him. This old man was very much like an artist in his previous world. He could find beauty everywhere and see the subtleties that ordinary people often overlook. But now when he looked at Su Sheng, he suddenly realized that the face of this young man was it was very similar to that Su Weng. In other words, the outline of his face was exactly what Su Weng looked like when he was young. The reason why Li Yunqin couldn't recognize him was that the temperament of the two was completely different. Su Weng was old, but full of interest in everything in the world, like a vigorous young man. Su Sheng was young, but his face was full of sorrow, as if he had already seen through the world. He looked like a person past his prime. It was this contrast that made him unable to connect the two until he felt water vapor. At this time, Su Sheng had drunk a whole jar of wine and opened the second jar. But his stomach was still flat, without the slightest sign of swelling. Ordinary people like the shopkeeper would probably think, this is magical. However, Li Yunqin, who was the best at magical means here, knew that this was indeed an unusual method. Otherwise, how could an ordinary person drink so much wine? As soon as this idea came out, he noticed the subtle changes around him. It was autumn now. The leaves and grass were all dry, rustling in the wind. However, after Su Sheng drank for a while, the rustling sound disappeared. Then, dew began to gather on the tips of the withered leaves. But of course it was not dew. It was more like it was seeping out from the inside of the leaf. Ordinary people would not be able to detect it. However, Li Yunqin's true body was a member of the royal family of the water, and his senses were far sharper than an ordinary person's. So he turned his head. Upon seeing this scene, he was finally certain that Su Sheng was no ordinary person. This scene was more like he had used some kind of method to disperse the water vapor in his body through these plants. How could ordinary people have such an ability? Therefore, he stood up and walked to Su Sheng's table. Su Sheng was originally squatting on the ground drinking wine, so Li Yunqin also squatted down beside him. The three people at the other table and the shopkeeper were curious to see him like this. But these people who traveled extensively to do business knew the principle of don't meddle in other people's business. So they just watched from afar and didn't bother him. After a dozen breaths, Li Yunqin finally said, Su Weng? Half of the young man's face was covered by the wine jar, and only one of his eyes glanced in his direction. Then he turned back. Just when Li Yunqin was about to ask again, he pushed the wine jar. The big black jar buzzed for a few rounds, and then stood on the ground. It's you, he said weakly, as if he hadn't eaten for a few days, or as if he had just had a dream. Alas, I knew you would come. After saying this, he leaned against the bench with his arms hanging limply beside him, as if it was too hard for him to even sit up straight. Li Yunqin let out a sigh of relief and thought for a while. It's really Master Su. It's been a few months since we parted in Dongting, and Master Su has changed a lot. But how did you end up begging for wine? Su Sheng took a few breaths. It was not because he was tired. It was more like, it was because he felt it was too hard to breathe before. So he held it in. Now he couldn't hold it anymore. So he took a few deep breaths. And up? Alas. He moved his fingers weakly as if waving his hand. I'm too lazy to say. Since you are here, it's fine. You help me. Li Yunqin said calmly. That's easy. Help you with what? Su Sheng's eyelids trembled. It took him a while to say, kill me. Master Su, you must be joking. Li Yunqin was a little surprised, but he didn't show it. It's not convenient here. How about we change places and have a good talk? Su Sheng tilted his head and stared at him with a pair of dull eyes like those of a dead fish. I never joke. I will repay you in a few days if you help me to get rid of me. Li Yunqin stared at him suspiciously for a while. He saw a layer of deathly gray on his face. Su Sheng's expression made him slightly moved. He felt that he had seen Su Sheng's face before, but he always felt that it should never appear on him. He thought for a while and decided to give it a try. by some means that didn't belong to this world. So he sighed. It seems that Master Su has other secrets. But I'm not a person who likes to get to the bottom of things. Since Master Su wants to die, I will send you on your way. But promise to repay me. Even if you become a ghost, you must remember it. Su Sheng's face didn't change at all when he said this. His eyes were still drooping, and he gently exhaled. The corners of his mouth curled up. It was probably a sign of consent. Fine. But this place is very close to the lair of those stinky Taoists, and there are always some small fries walking around. Li Yunxin moved closer to him and whispered in his ear. It's not easy to kill Su Wang, so you have to cooperate with me. If you want to get rid of him, this is your last effort. Do as I say, and after this step, you don't have to worry anymore, okay? Su Sheng seemed to force himself to stay awake, and nodded slightly. Li Yunxin moved closer again. I know, you feel that everything in the world is boring now. Look at these people walking around. You hear them talking and laughing, and you feel that it has nothing to do with you. It's like there's a thin veil between you and them. You can hear and see, but you're indifferent, right? You don't bother to do anything. You don't even bother to move. Sitting here, you feel that it takes a lot of courage to even move your body. As he said this, he patted Su Sheng's shoulder. He saw Su Sheng's eyeballs tremble, as if he felt what Li Yunxin said. Li Yunxin said in a lower and gentler voice, You don't even bother to feel sad. You feel that you're surrounded by gloomy clouds and fog. But these things can't make you cry. You feel suffocated. When you're so sad, you really want to die, to leave this world. But you don't even want to die, so you're begging me, right? Su Sheng's eyeballs trembled slightly. It was as if Li Yunxin's words had directly hit his heart, expressing all the feelings he was too lazy to express. The light of hope shone in his eyes. But this hope was not a yearning for life, but a yearning for death. He finally had something worth pursuing for the time being, and some desire was born, even if this desire represented despair. Li Yunxin whispered in his ear, Okay, just like this, you want to die, really want to die. Now you have to work hard to cooperate with me, so that you can be free from this world. Su Gong, if I want to kill you, I have to do it in 3 steps. First, I want you to remember one thing. Everything I'm doing now, I'm helping you. After saying this, he stretched out his hand and patted Su Sheng's chest lightly. Su Sheng seemed to nod his head slightly. The second thing, since I'm helping you, you have to do whatever I say. Now, I want you to take a deep breath. After saying this, the hand on Su Sheng's chest gently exerted force, pressing against Su Sheng's chest. Su Sheng heaved a sigh of relief because of this pressure. When he exhaled, Li Yunxin said in an irresistible tone, Now you're reborn. Then, he let go of his hand, stood up, and took 2 steps back. He looked at Su Sheng sternly and said in a low voice, Wake up. This sentence seemed to have a powerful magic power. After Su Sheng heard this sentence, he, who was originally lifeless and seemed to be on his last breath, suddenly looked like a drowning person who finally poked his head out of the water. He took a deep breath as if he was convulsing. This movement was so violent that when he straightened his body, he overturned the bench behind him. The onlookers and the boss at the next table didn't know what happened, and were stunned for a moment. When Su Sheng straightened his body and stood up, his eyes widened. The previous gloomy look was completely gone, and his face was full of surprise. He looked at his hands, then at the sky above his head, the withered leaves around him, the crowd, and finally at Li Yunxin. You. I've never seen such a serious depression like yours. Li Yunxin sighed, frowned, and tilted his head to look at him. How did you get yourself into this state? Su Sheng blinked. What? Let's talk somewhere else. Li Yunxin walked forward and grabbed his arm. But Su Sheng continued to stare at him, not minding the fact that he had been caught. The boss and the 3 diners stared at him in confusion. They saw Li Yunxin put his hand on his chest, and took out a silver pot out of nowhere. He squeezed the silver pot into a silver ingot, and threw it to the boss. Daotong is doing business. Don't tell anyone about what happened today. If anyone asks about it, it must be a demon spy. Before the boss came back to his senses, he waved his sleeves. The two of them suddenly disappeared without a trace. The boss held the silver ingot in his hand. After a long time, he looked at the table where Li Yunqin had been sitting. There was originally half a golden leaf on the table, but now, the golden leaf had turned into an ordinary withered leaf. He quickly reached into his bosom and felt some broken leaf foam. So the three people at the same table looked at each other. After a long time they said, "Seeing an immortal. What a blessing, a blessing." Li Yunqin took Su Sheng and hid their figures, but they didn't fly away. For mortals, this place was far from the camp of Taoist Xianmen. It was almost a day's journey. But for cultivators, such a distance could be considered as the edge of a bed. If they flew here, they would definitely be discovered by Taoist Xianmen. Li Yunqin didn't want to expose his whereabouts at the moment, so he used the earth escape. This time, he escaped more than 10 miles away. When they appeared on the ground again, the row of shacks had become a grayish-yellow background. They were now in a military tent in the camp of the allied forces of various countries. This military tent wasn't big, and it seemed to belong to a general. When they showed up, the general was sleeping soundly. Li Yunqin used a magical power to make him sleep more deeply. Then, he let go of Su Sheng's arm, sat on a table beside the general's bed, and let out a sigh. What happened? Su Sheng still looked at him in great surprise. What did you do? Tell me first, are you Su Wang? Li Yunqin frowned slightly. The Su Sheng in front of him seemed to be very different from Su Wang. In Dongting, Su Wang was so mysterious that Li Yunqin could only call himself boy in front of him. But this young man in front of him looked like an ignorant young man. If he didn't use the magical power and say those words, he almost couldn't recognize him. I'm not, Su Sheng said firmly. Now his eyes were bright, and his voice was low and powerful. But you know I'm talking about Su Wang? Who are you? Why do you want to kill me? I am and I'm not. Su Sheng walked around in the tent. He looked at himself as if looking at a stranger, and then looked at Li Yunqin. What did you do? What did you say to me just now? What illness? What do you know? Li Yunqin sighed. Well, I'll tell you first. Do you always feel depressed and slow to react? Do you feel that life is boring and you don't want to do anything? He spread his hands. This is called depression. There's something wrong here. He raised his hand and pointed at his head. It's the most serious case I've ever seen. You want to die, don't you? But you don't even want to die, so you ask me for help, right? Su Sheng looked at him in a daze. How? How do you know this? Have you seen other people also? A lot. In your world, in this situation, people don't have enough to eat, don't have warm clothes, and are oppressed every day. But no one cares and no one pays attention to it, right? This is called the lack of basic humane care. Li Yunqin tilted his head and looked at him. So, you want to know about depression? Then tell me first, how did you do it? Who are you? Su Sheng hesitated for a moment and said in disbelief. This is my reincarnation. You actually managed to break my tribulation body. You've ruined my great plan. But how on earth did you do it? Li Yunqin waved his hand. Don't be impatient. Don't be too optimistic. Let's not ask what this reincarnation means. Let's just say that your condition is hopeless. Don't think that I have cured you. I just hypnotized you. I aroused a little desire in your heart, and then followed this desire to pull your subconscious to the surface. He spread his hands. Everyone has a little desire to survive in their subconscious. So now the person who is talking to me, to paraphrase your sentence pattern, is you, and not you. I don't know how long your subconscious can hold on, but eventually it will have to dive down again. At that time, your half-dead reincarnation will still be the reincarnation. He paused. Wait a minute. Reincarnation? Did you split a real body to go through the tribulation? But you don't seem to be the real body. Su Sheng heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that his tribulation body had not been broken. With this knot in his heart solved, he calmed down a lot. He stared at Li Yunqin seriously for a while, and suddenly laughed. Good boy. You are even so good at things I don't know. At this time his tone became old, and a little bit like Su Wang. Since you have this kind of skill, I have changed my mind. Why don't you stay by my side, and help me get rid of this reincarnation? You have fulfilled your filial duty. What do you think? Li Yunxin frowned and snorted. When you were Su Wang, I respected you for being old. But now you say that you are not Su Wang, and you look like this. I think it is a little inappropriate to talk about filial duty with me. Su Sheng squinted his eyes and laughed. I say you are filial. No matter how old or young I am, you will not feel wronged. My good grandson, didn't that big fish tell you about the past 3,000 years ago? His words suddenly stunned Li Yunxin. After a while he gasped, You are? Su Sheng laughed. Without the worry on his face, he looked just like a handsome young man. At this time, his expression even looked a little immature and bashful. But he laughed and said, You are right. The incarnation of the Grand Supreme State is naturally slightly different from your incarnation of the true state. Chapter 406. But Li Yunxin just stared at him and said nothing. This person, he is the master of calligrapher? He was stunned for a while. Then he waved his sleeve and pointed at Su Sheng's nose. You liar! Because of his big movement, Su Sheng waved his sleeve and rolled Ye Jiang on the bed to the ground. Ye Jiang rolled on the bed and groaned, trying to wake up. Li Yunxin waved his hand again and told him to go back to sleep. Su Sheng shook his head with a smile. If I wanted to lie to you, why would I lie to you about this? Then listen to me. Then he began to talk slowly. From the first time Su Wang met Li Yunxin in Dongting, until Su Wang turned into a golden light and disappeared. There were many details that Li Yunxin didn't notice. But now that he thought about it carefully, he could prove it. After listening for a while, he realized that Su Sheng was telling the truth. He was indeed that Su Wang. As for Su Wang and Su Sheng, were they the master of calligrapher? Putting aside his own words for now, and only looking at the facts, Su Wang's methods and aura were extremely brilliant. Su Sheng's means were not inferior to others. When he was drinking, he used the surrounding plants to disperse the water vapor in his body. Although this method looked simple, and not as magical as dancing in the air, or burrowing into the ground, any cultivator should know that it was actually very difficult to do. Today, the tavern was located in the northwest. Combined with the time and weather at that time, that place should belong to the metal element. It was another autumn day elite month. Not only the metal element, but also the death element. However, in this kind of environment, this resurrection had almost reversed the situation. It was called the living water qi in the body spreading out through the dead plants. Anyone who knew a little about cultivation would know that this was a method that defied the natural order of things. If he had such a level of cultivation, Li Yunxin suddenly snorted coldly and looked Su Sheng up and down. Master of calligrapher. Master of calligrapher. Humph, what is your reincarnation body? How do I know that you are not a big demon who deceived me with your special magic? Su Sheng laughed again. You are really like your mother. If you want to ask, just ask. What's the point of trying to goad me? Since you want to know, I'll tell you. But the first thing I want to ask you is, what do you think of the techniques that the orthodoxies and sword sects cultivate? Li Yunxin shrugged. Nothing much. After saying that, he didn't say anything else. He only looked at Su Sheng coldly. Before this, when Li Yunxin didn't know his identity, Li Yunxin had behaved rather kindly. However, now that Su Sheng had admitted that he was the sage of calligraphy, he had become cold and indifferent, as if he had suffered a great grievance. Su Sheng did not argue with him. Instead, he laughed and sighed as if he was looking at a child in a fit of pique. Even if you don't tell me, I still know. I have ascended to the immortal world for so many years. So naturally, I have seen and heard more than you. Sigh. Right now, the celestial sect of wonders cultivates the evil path. No matter who said this, it sounded ordinary to Li Yunxin. It was the evil path in the first place. To cultivate a person's heart to be as hard as stone, similar to that of a demon. If it wasn't the evil path, what was it? Even the demon sect, in his previous world, paid attention to things like brotherhood and loyalty. However, the high-level cultivators of Daotong and Kinzo here didn't even need a fig leaf. However, now that it was said by the self-proclaimed sage of calligraphy, he couldn't help but be slightly surprised. Su Sheng continued to sigh. I used to think that I was indeed cultivating the heavenly heart technique, and I never had any hesitation. I went through the tribulation, severed the 7 emotions and 6 desires, and finally achieved the Taishang emotionless body. But now that I think about it carefully, it was like a big dream. When did I advance to the Taishang? I don't know. Remembering when I advanced, when I broke through, and what kind of progress I made. These are all delusions and desires. Since I don't care, how can I remember? The Taishang emotionless body, what I forgot was not only emotions. In fact, even I forgot myself. At that time. At this point he paused and smiled again. I only felt that 1,000 years of chaos was like a flash. Li Yunxin was originally frowning and listening. At this time, he couldn't help but interrupt and ask, like a dream? Su Xing was slightly stunned, and thought for a while. Then he said, like a dream. Li Yunxin nodded. This so-called Taishang emotionless body. Is there really something wrong? He used to think that the reason why people are human is because they have a physical body, memories, and emotions. Without emotions, they are no different from machines. They have a physical body and a dusty memory in the body. What is the purpose of cultivating to this level? What is the purpose of ascending to become a celestial being? Isn't this the same as cultivating from the spirit of all living things into a stupid thing, like a stubborn stone? He used to think that maybe it was because his realm wasn't high enough, so he couldn't experience the indescribable wonder of it. However, now that he heard what the sage of calligraphy said, he realized that the real situation seemed to be like what he thought. Emotionless was really a simple and crude way of forgetting emotions. The sage of calligraphy cultivated to the realm of emotionless. Although he was powerful, he also became muddle-headed, as if he was in a dream. People fell asleep and woke up from a big dream. They only felt that they had just fallen asleep, but in fact, a long night had passed. This was really evil. Then, I ascended to heaven. Speaking of this, the sage of calligraphy paused again and glanced at Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin knew that the ascended to heaven mentioned by the sage of calligraphy probably referred to a special ending state. Not ascending, but also not dying, in the common sense. But it seemed that the sage of calligraphy didn't do it willingly. It should be the Freemasonry's trick. But he didn't ask. If the other party didn't want to say this kind of thing, it would be useless to ask. Seeing his reaction, the sage of calligraphy seemed to be slightly surprised. He didn't expect him to be so calm. So he nodded approvingly and continued to say, My ascended to heaven is death and doom in the eyes of others. But in my eyes it is a new life. Humans are originally babies and innocent. When they are born, they are muddle-headed, and gradually grow up to have 7 emotions and 6 desires. After I ascended to heaven, I was like a baby, but slightly different. This difference is that I still have a little intelligence. It is this intelligence that prevents me from becoming a wandering ghost, and I can cultivate from the beginning. But my cultivation is the opposite. In the past, to cultivate the divine will of heaven, you have to cultivate from emotion to ruthlessness. You have to go through tribulations one by one, and get rid of the 7 emotions and 6 desires. But now, I have to cultivate from ruthlessness to emotion. I also want to go through tribulations, which is the tribulation body you saw last time and this time. But I don't have time to take it slowly. Su Xing frowned slightly. In the last tribulation body, I comprehended desire. Because of desire, people are curious about everything in the world, and they are grateful and happy to every flower, grass, stone, and wood. In this tribulation body, I comprehended suffering. But this time something went wrong. Speaking of this, he paused for a while and took a deep breath. In this body, I walked in the world and comprehended all the sufferings and hardships in the world. But I didn't expect that the sufferings in the world are 10 times, 100 times, or even 1,000 times more intense than desire and sorrow. So many sufferings and misfortunes came at me. When I sensed that something was wrong, I had already sunk into it and couldn't get out. In the words of my previous cultivation, I entered the devil's heart and entered the absurd. Hearing this, Li Yunxin let out a sigh of relief. Although Su Xing had only said a few words, Li Yunxin's heart was pounding. If he wasn't a cultivator, he wouldn't know how dangerous this matter was. For ordinary people, to cultivate and get rid of their desires, they would start from the emptiness realm, step by step. After cultivating to the peak of the profound realm, they would spend hundreds of years with the help of their peers, the guidance of their seniors, and all kinds of miraculous pills to get close to the realm of supreme indifference. It was like a child slowly growing up and stretching his body after more than 10 years. But now, Su Sheng not only did the opposite, but also compressed the process to the extreme. Ordinary cultivators use 5 or 6 years to go through a tribulation, but he used 5 or 6 years to go through dozens of tribulations at the same time. There were so many sorrowful emotions in the world. How many heart-wrenching and lung-splitting experiences did he have to experience in order to get rid of all the emotions and find back what he had lost? In this way, he only made himself severely depressed, but he didn't go crazy. It was terrible. What was even more terrible was that he claimed that he had experienced desire and sorrow in the same way, and in this tribulation body. This Su Sheng should be a sage, right? Chapter 407. Li Yunxin looked at him with a complicated gaze. So, this tribulation body of yours that is used to understand suffering has failed. Su Sheng raised a finger and poked him lightly. He seemed to be in a good mood. It should have failed. That's why I calculated your qi and waited for you there. Just to take a breath and ask you to help me get rid of it. But who knew you had such a trick up your sleeve? Don't be too optimistic. Li Yunxin frowned. You're not the real you now. I don't know how long you can stay here. Once you dive in, you'll be the same as before. Maybe after I say these things, you'll be the same as before. So you want to help me achieve this tribulation body? Su Sheng said seriously. You were born into the state of Taishang, right? Li Yunxin's expression froze. When I saw you before, I roughly guessed it. Since you're my descendant, how can I not pay attention to you now that I've entered the world? Su Sheng said in a low voice. Now that I see you again, I feel that your state of Taishang has been broken. I'm not asking what you've been through. I'm just asking you. You don't know what to do now, do you? Li Yunxin's expression changed again. After a while he said softly, I used to think that I knew, but after seeing you today, I don't seem to know anymore. A day ago, he was still thinking about going through the tribulation. He wanted to experience the ways of the world, and then go through the tribulation. He wanted to follow the method of Daotong and Kenzo, and cultivate honestly, hoping to reach the state of Taishang emotionlessness. But now he met Su Sheng. If he was really the sage of calligrapher, it meant that the sage of calligrapher had personally told him that the path of Daotong and Kenzo was not working. The sage had spent 1,000 years to clear his emotions, but now he was trying to find them again. So you know what to do? Li Yunxin looked at him. I know a little. Su Sheng emphasized the last 2 words. So consider it filial piety, consider it for yourself. Do you want to help me achieve this tribulation body? This time, Li Yunxin took a little longer to think. He brushed Yijiang to the ground and sat on Yijiang's small bed. After being in a daze for a moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Su Sheng. You are serious? Are you really the master of calligrapher of this generation? The ancestor who married the sword saint 3,000 years ago and gave birth to this body, as the Lord Dongting said. Su Sheng smiled. Sort of. Li Yunxin thought for a while and suddenly sneered. So what? It had been 3,000 years, and other than a history, there was almost no blood relation between them. Do I have to recognize a monkey as my ancestor, just because a human transformed from a monkey? Don't talk to me about filial piety, especially when you're like this. If you want me to help you, I can. But first, give me some benefits. He paused for a moment. Long Da and Long Air said that there is a treasure on Cloudy Mountain. Once he obtained that treasure, he would be able to command all the demons in the world. You used to be the sage of the Cloudy Mountain. Tell me first, do you have such a thing? His change in attitude was very sudden. He was speaking in a friendly manner, but he suddenly became sarcastic and snobbish. But Su Sheng didn't show any surprise. He just shook his head and didn't answer the question. I understand how you feel. Then he pointed at Li Yunxin with his finger. Afraid. Am I right? The Grand Elder was originally heartless, but now he has a heart. Therefore, many emotions that he didn't care about before have gradually touched him again and again. However, he has never experienced this kind of emotion that mortals are used to, so he has an instinctive fear. For example, when a child learns to swim, he is happy to play in the shallow water. But if a big wave comes, he will be frightened. A kind smile appeared on Su Sheng's face, which was completely inconsistent with his appearance. Suddenly realizing that there is one more blood relative standing in front of you in this world. You are afraid of this emotion, aren't you? Li Yunqin narrowed his eyes and looked at him without saying a word. Su Sheng smiled and sighed. Haven't I felt this way before? I will only be more afraid than you are now. But now I want to tell you. Don't be ruthless and abandon your desires. That is the path of evil. What you need to do is to ask your own heart. What do you really want? If you follow the path of the previous Xian men, in the end, you can only drift with the waves and lose yourself. Li Yunqin curled his lips. My heart now wants to know whether the treasure of Mount Yunshan that Long Da and Ruji mentioned exists or not. Or is it just a bait thrown out by the Shinryu to lure them to Mount Yunshan? Su Sheng shook his head and sighed slightly. All right. Since you don't want to say it, we will talk about it later. As for the treasure of Mount Yunshan, it probably exists. Li Yunqin frowned. What do you mean by probably? Because there has always been such a rumor. Su Sheng said. It is said that there is a treasure in Mount Yunshan. If you obtain it, you can command a group of demons, and even ascend to the clouds and transform into a dragon. But this rumor was spread during my time. Ascend to the clouds and transform into a dragon. These 4 words captured Li Yunqin's heart. He slightly straightened his body. At your time? You mean? Then how can you not know about it? Is there anyone who knows more about the rumors of Mount Yunshan than you? Su Sheng snorted and laughed. Because this rumor was spread by the art saint back then. She only said that there was such a treasure in Mount Yunshan, but she didn't say where it was. She also stayed in Mount Yunshan for some time. Even I can't tell whether she hid the treasure somewhere, or there was no such thing at all. After saying this, he looked at Li Yunqin again. Now, you are also cultivating the painting Dao that she passed down. Li Yunqin immediately remembered what Yu Meng, the sword saint of the 213th generation, had told her when she was at the top of Little Rock Mountain in Little Rock Mountain. The sword saint who had failed to ascend said that the next generation of calligrapher and sword saint attacked the art saint 1,000 years ago because they were deceived by the Freemasonry. When the 2 sages figured out the crux of the matter, they were unable to reverse the situation and both died. Su Sheng must be referring to this matter when he said immortalization. He knew the secret of that year. Thinking of this, Li Yunqin gasped. He suddenly realized that he had actually met 2 saints in a row within a month. So he said, indeed. It's said that the art saint joined the devil 1,000 years ago. And you and the sword saint led all the cultivators in the world to attack him. But in fact you were provoked by the Freemasonry. After the art saint died, you also realized the truth, but there was nothing you could do. So you immortalized, right? Did the Freemasonry kill you? They can kill sages? Su Sheng was finally surprised. How do you know these things? Li Yunqin smiled. Maybe I know more than you think. I also know that the previous generation's sword saint also failed to pass the heavenly tribulation. I also know how the art saint created the painting Dao. Do you know these things? Su Sheng sucked in a breath of cold air. Where did you get this information? Then, he suddenly took 2 steps forward and grabbed Li Yunqin's shoulder, staring at him. What I'm looking for is the essence of the art saint's painting Dao. What else do you know? Chapter 408. Su Sheng lost his composure at this moment, which was out of Li Yunqin's expectation. In fact, the topic that he wanted to bring up was the jade chip of enlightenment. But he did not expect that the essence of painting was enough to excite the former master of calligraphy. Therefore he realized that something was wrong. Just like how people would wake up when they heard a loud noise, or felt a violent tremor in their sleep. It wasn't a good thing for Su Sheng to have such intense emotional fluctuations. A moment ago, He had just gasped and said those words. The next moment, his hand that was grabbing onto Li Yunxin's hand suddenly became powerless. The astonished expression froze on his face like a mask. Then the mask loosened bit by bit, as if it was slowly melting. His face drooped, and his expression collapsed. The aura of death and melancholy surged up like a tide. Su Sheng's hand slipped down. His back, which was originally straight, also wilted. He was stunned for a moment, took 2 steps back, and suddenly smiled bitterly. Sigh. Forget it. So what if I know? There are so many sufferings in the world. Why should I go through it again? Li Yunxin. At this point, he didn't even seem to be in the mood to speak. He just sighed, turned around, and sat on the bed that belonged to the general beside Li Yunxin. The subconscious that Li Yunxin had induced sank into the depths of his sea of consciousness. Su Sheng once again became the terrifying depression patient who had failed the tribulation. He didn't want to listen to Li Yunxin talk about the essence of painting Tao anymore. And he didn't want to think about the future. He wanted to stay in this small military tent without moving until the end of the world. Li Yunxin frowned. Just as he was about to think of a few more ways to continue this conversation, he suddenly heard footsteps outside the tent. It was already afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set in the west. The orange sunlight reflected on the tent, and he could also see the shadow of another person cast on the tent. There was also the sound of armor colliding and a person's voice. General. The person seemed to be jogging and had urgent matters to attend to. Therefore, before he entered the tent, he called out in panic. Li Yunxin did not care much about these things. He chose this military tent because the yang energy in the army was extremely strong. And this General Ye was also a general. After all, he had a bit of the aura of a powerful army. Thus, by using this yang qi to form a formation, he could conceal his and Su Sheng's figures and auras without leaving a trace, making it extremely difficult for the people of the Celestial Sect of Wonders to discover him. Now that someone had come to look for the Ivory General, he waved his sleeves. As soon as the Immortal's method was used, the General slowly woke up. He and Su Sheng were still in the tent, but in the eyes of mortals, they had disappeared without a trace. As soon as he woke up, he saw Wei Xiaobao sleeping on the ground and cursed. Then, a junior colonel pushed aside the curtain and barged in. General, he's here. It's coming. Fang Jiang had just woken up and felt dizzy. As he crawled up from the ground, he frowned and asked, "What the F***CK is coming?" Li Yunxin ignored them. He only stood up and said to Su Sheng, "We have to make things clear. The treasure on Cloudy Mountain. Otherwise, if something happens to me, no one will be able to help you. Look at my finger right now." However, Su Sheng was not in the mood to cooperate with him. He only shook his head. "What's there to look at?" Li Yunxin reached out to pinch his chin and lifted his face. She frowned and said, "You're a sage. You are a saint. Don't you feel ashamed in your current state? I only need you to focus once more, and I can give you another chance to prove your Tao." Speaking to this point, the junior colonel's voice reached his ears. "The angel has already come from the north camp, and is about to see Ding Min and the others. I can't stop him. Right now the angel has already brought people into the camp. I'm afraid they are going to be punished for their crimes." Hearing these words, Li Yunxin furrowed his brows and became distracted. He glanced to his side. Ding Min? Was it the Ding Min who had traveled with him a few days ago in Manwan Mountain? The camp he was in was the Qing Army's camp. There wouldn't be a few with the same name, would there? The word angel also caused him to become slightly distracted. Thinking about it for a moment, he knew that this angel was not the angel from his previous world. The angel here referred to the imperial envoy, the emperor's envoy. Hearing these words, Commander Ye's eyes widened. "Why are you looking for them? Isn't the matter already concluded? They have done a meritorious service in escorting the Kinzo masters. Don't they already King forget about the matter of the red soil?" Hearing this, Li Yunxin realized that this Ding Min was the Ding Min he knew. However, this matter only attracted his attention for a short while. He and Ding Min, Su Mao, and Yin Er could be considered strangers who met by chance. Perhaps in their lives, Li Yunxin was a character worthy of telling their children and grandchildren. However, in Li Yunxin's eyes, they were just a few faint colors in the background. He turned his head and continued to look at Su Sheng. Just as he was about to speak, Commander Ye once again attracted his attention. They said they saw the emperor of the Li Kingdom. Who would believe that? Commander Ye muttered angrily. However, he still rose to pick up his armor. As he helped the officer put on his armor, he scolded. These petty officials. Didn't they just lose their job and make up a few lies to pass the buck? Don't say they saw some demon. If I had to say it, I would say I saw a celestial being and took the red soil. Damn it, are you serious? What does he want to ask? What can he ask? Bah. And he said it was His Majesty's order? Bah bah bah. He obviously saw that our general and commander are not here, so he wants to take advantage of us. I will go over now and let him know that the soldiers under me are not to be messed with. After saying this, he started scolding in a different way. Hearing this, Li Yunxin frowned slightly. He understood the ins and outs of the matter. Ding Min, Su Mao, and the others seemed to be under the command of this Commander Ye. It was a coincidence that he found this tent. After Ding Min and the others returned, they sent Kong Tongzi there, but they lost the red soil. Thus, he told them everything that had happened on the way, including meeting the demon Li Yunxin and meeting the two ghost emperors. Ding Min said all this, and Commander Ye treated it as an excuse. However, this officer seemed to be a protective general and did not want to pursue their responsibility. However, this matter had reached the ears of the emperor's envoy who had come with the army. He didn't know if this envoy had used some method to contact the emperor thousands of li away in the capital of the Qing kingdom, and told him about this matter. Thus, the emperor told him to go ask again. To Commander Ye, he felt that his army had lost its commander, and was being bullied and taken advantage of by the despicable civil officials. However, to Li Yunxin, he acutely noticed the word emperor. The emperor had hundreds of thousands of soldiers under his command. Ding Min's group of 50 people was like a speck of dust in front of the emperor. How could he care about them? What the Qing emperor cared about was probably the word ghost emperor. The emperor had great power in his hands, and it could be said that his glory was unparalleled. Anyone who sat on the throne hoped to live a long life. However, the longevity of the common people compared to the cultivators was just a snap of the fingers. The emperor lived like a prince, and the long-lived ones could only live for 60 or 70 years. The path of longevity was, without a doubt, what they liked the most. In the Guanyuan cave in the mountains, Li Yunxin suggested a plan to Hatred and the Zither king. He said that they could pretend to have demons assassinate the emperor to attract the attention of the cultivators of the Xianmen sect. These words were not spoken carelessly. The ignorant common people did not know. But the emperors of the various countries had many eyes and ears, and were well informed. They must have known that the emperor of the Li kingdom, Jilan, had died. His soul was not taken away by Black Bai Yanjun, but because of the common people's wishes, he instantly became a ghost emperor. How could the emperors not be tempted when they heard this news? However, they knew that the ghost emperor was immediately pursued by the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo. It was unknown whether he was dead or alive. How could they have the courage to become a second ghost emperor? But now, the reason why Li Yunxin asked Ding Min, Su Mao, and the others to leave the mountain safely was because he had the same idea. A group of Qing soldiers had seen the ghost emperor, and there were two of them. This news spread through the allied army camp, and would soon be sent to the emperors of the various countries. At this time, the hearts of the emperors would find it difficult to calm down. He had casually made this move, but he did not expect it to work so quickly. It could be said that God was helping him. Thus, he temporarily put the matter of Su Sheng aside. In the end, Su Sheng had returned to his lifeless appearance. The outside world was bright, and the raging waves had nothing to do with him. He was just a quiet bystander. Even if he sat on the small bed, there was no need for him to bother. At this moment, Ye General had already dressed up. He had been cursing nonstop for a quarter of an hour, and was ready to leave the tent. The curtain was suddenly lifted, and a flushed face appeared behind it. Tianyi, you have a sharp tongue. Wait until I return to the capital and report these words to the emperor. I want to see if you still have the ability to talk endlessly in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. General Tianyi and the small colonel beside him froze for a moment. The person outside the tent was the imperial envoy. The small colonel was only stunned because of this, but General was also stunned because of something else. He froze for a moment and furrowed his brows. He carefully stared at the imperial envoy who had stepped into the tent with a face full of anger for a moment before saying, "You, Fu Bonan." Looking at him, he seemed to know him. General was not old, just over 20 years old. This imperial envoy looked to be only 3 or 4 years older than him. Now that he had called out his name, the anger on his face did not disappear. He wore a bright red official robe. There were single-horn xiezi patches on his chest, shoulders, and back. According to the official system of the Qing Kingdom, he was a patrolling judge of the Ministry of Justice. His rank was not high, but his status was very high. When Li Yunxin was in the city of Wei, the magistrate Li Yaoxi was uneasy because he heard the news that a magistrate was going to patrol here. He was Fu Bonan's colleague. The magistrate imperial envoy entered the tent and stepped aside, allowing another 3 people to enter. 2 of them were soldiers wearing black armor and silver helmets. They were sent by the Ministry of Justice to protect the magistrate on patrol. The other one was Ding Min, whom Li Yunxin was familiar with. However, Ding Min had been stripped of her armor and her weapon. Although she was not tied up, judging from the expression on her face, she was not in a good situation. "If it is me." The imperial envoy waved his sleeve. "Tianyi, I want to summon this captain for questioning, but you made people stop me in every way possible. You forced me to come to the camp to fetch him. Do you know that you are not stopping me?" He raised his hand and saluted. "It is the matter of His Majesty." Although Fu Bonan was not old, he had the spirit of a successful young man. Li Yaoxi, the magistrate of the city of Wei, was only a 4th-level official at the age of 50. Fu Bonan, a patrolling judge, was also a 4th-level official. It could be said that his future was limitless. Jiang Tianyi sighed, as if he was suppressing all kinds of emotions in his heart. He lowered his head and said, Yes. I did not think it through." Although he said it like this, he did not show any fear. It was more like he had to give him face because of the word His Majesty. Fu Bonan heard his words, but his anger did not disappear. He raised his hand and pointed at Ding Min. He looked at Jiang and said, "It was a good thing. But because of your excuses, I have no choice but to bring him to the capital to question him. Is it true that he ran into the Ghost Emperor? Or is it because he lost the red soil that he made up this excuse to confuse the public? The prison of the Ministry of Justice is empty now. Let him stay there for a few days and try all kinds of methods. Then we will know whether he is telling the truth or not." He did not know what kind of scary things were in the prison of the Ministry of Justice. Li Yunxin saw the junior colonel behind Jiang, and his face suddenly changed. But Ding Min's expression did not change. He wanted to open his mouth a few times, but the soldiers beside him kept staring at him. When they saw that he wanted to open his mouth, they kicked him in the back of his leg, telling him to swallow his words. The actions of the 2 soldiers of this judge seemed to annoy Jiang. He straightened his body and snorted, "Fu Bonan, don't be so shameless. Seeing that we are familiar with each other, I will give you face and call you Angel. But this Ding Min is a soldier under my command. Go to the capital and ask around. When has our subjugation army ever given away our brothers under our command?" Commander Ye laughed coldly. "That little Bai Lu followed me 6 years ago. And you still hold a grudge against me? Bah! Who in the capital doesn't know that this kind of thing can't be done seriously? It would be laughable if they were jealous of that kind of woman. I saw that you are a country bumpkin from Jinzhou, so I didn't care about you. But now you want to fight with me." The more he spoke, the more agitated he became. He even took 2 steps forward. The 2 military supervisors behind the judge hurriedly stepped forward with their sabers on their waists. Seeing this, the junior colonel behind the general had no choice but to brace himself and pull out his saber with a clang, shouting, "Who the hell dares to move?" The judge was not afraid. He straightened his neck and stared at him. Tianyi, you dare. You want to behave atrociously just because your father has some power. I am His Majesty's envoy. Today you can't touch a finger of mine. It can't be like 6 years ago. Ye Jiang immediately spat. I am not a poor official like you. You like to rely on my father's power. You like to bully people. Envoy. Bah. A dog. If you dare to take him to the capital, I will take 800 government soldiers and tear down the yamen of the Ministry of Justice. Such a loud scolding caused the expressions of the two soldiers and the junior colonel to completely change. The weapons in their hands all trembled. To the side, Li Yunqin also sighed. These two little bastards. He had originally planned on listening to the Qing Emperor's opinion of the Ghost Emperor. He had not expected to hear the old story of the two's jealousy. It could be said that enemies would not meet unless they were enemies. Chapter 409. He was about to end the dispute between the two young men, but someone was one step ahead of him. Ye Jiang and the imperial envoy were cursing, and the two supervisors behind the imperial envoy were also distracted. So Ding Min found an opportunity and suddenly shouted, General, Master Fu has already said that he will save my life. He only needs to ask some questions and bear the responsibility. He won't make things difficult for the other brothers. General, don't blame Master Fu wrongly. The two of them were scolding each other fiercely when they suddenly heard such words. Ye Jiang was stunned. Fu Bonan turned his head and glared at the two supervisors. Take him out. The supervisors knew that they had ruined his master's plan, so they didn't say anything and quickly pushed Ding Min out. Then Fu Bonan glared at Ye Jiang and pointed at him. Just wait and see. He was about to turn around and leave the tent. Ye Jiang frowned and stepped forward to pull Fu Bonan's arm. What do you mean? Are you making fun of me? The young imperial envoy seemed a little embarrassed. From Li Yunqin's point of view, he didn't want to make things difficult for Ding Min and Ye Jiang. But because of the anger that had accumulated in his heart in the early years, he specially came to make a trip to annoy Ye Jiang. But now that he was exposed by Ding Min, he didn't want to stay in this tent for the time being. But Ye Jiang didn't let him go. He just pulled him and didn't let go. Fu Bonan, you made fun of me and now you want to leave? Today, you have to make it clear. The imperial envoy was annoyed by his pull again. He simply turned around and flicked his sleeves, raising his eyebrows. Tianjiang, why are you getting more and more stupid? Ye Jiang was annoyed again. What did you say about me? But this time, Fu Bonan didn't argue with him. He still frowned. Do you know what happened in the capital? Ye Jiang was stunned and slowly let go of his hand. The junior colonel behind him seemed to be his confidant and was very observant. So when he saw Ye Jiang's expression and heard Fu Bonan's words, he hurriedly put the saber in his hand back into the sheath and left the tent with his head slightly lowered. When the curtain was put down again, Fu Bonan turned his head slightly and looked back, continuing, You still don't know, do you? I used to call you Jintu Nyo. That's not wrong at all. Ye Jiang looked even more confused, but he seemed to know that things were not what he thought. This Fu Bonan should have something to say. Thus his tone softened. What are you trying to say? Do you know that someone in the Yu Nation rebelled? Fu Bonan took a deep breath and shook his head. He walked a few steps to the side and sat down on a low stool. He raised his head to look at the fields. It's in Rongqing Yu country. A former bailiff named Zhao Sheng. He called himself Prince Rong, and had been rebelling for nearly a month. He also has a black knifing Juran under him. He is a Jianghu member of the Qing kingdom. He has also sought refuge with him, and is now a general under him. Gather a large number of Jianghu people and gang members from the Qing kingdom and Yu kingdom to join him. Tianyi frowned. What does it have to do with me? Fu Bonan sighed. She looked like she really wanted to scold him, but she was too lazy to do so. She pointed at him and asked, Isn't your father the great general of the Northwest? Tianyi stretched his eyebrows and said, You mean this? Ha! My father has 50,000 soldiers under his command. It's easy for him to destroy the Yu Nation. Is he afraid of the roving bandits of the Yu Nation? You want to talk about this? Fu Bonan looked at him seriously. But 10 days ago, The rebels of the Yu nation had occupied half of the territory of the Yu nation within 20 days and confronted the emperor of the Yu nation across the Rhone River. Another group, more than 10,000 people, who were farmers 20 days ago, invaded the territory of the Yu nation and occupied Rongqing. Your father sent troops to attack and went into battle himself. As a result, he was ambushed as soon as he passed the Stone Forest Mountain and was defeated. Tianyi was stunned for a while and suddenly scolded, "Nonsense! How could my father be defeated?" Fu Bonan was not annoyed. He said to himself, "Your father's defeat shocked the court and the public. Memorials accusing him of advancing rashly, dereliction of duty, losing the frontier, and insulting the prestige of the country were like flying snow. But even so, if it was a month ago, it would just be an insignificant storm. But think about it again. Who are the people who are transporting the red earth to the heaven-span swamp?" He stared at Tianyi. "The general of your Zhichong army Shui Yao, the general of the Vexation army Yao Yi, the general of the First Ascension army, Hu La, and these three generals have all died in the mountains, haven't they? Who are the three of them?" At this moment, Tianyi finally understood a little. He widened his eyes. These three are all my father's former generals. Your father's former generals have all been sent here by Grand General Li." Fu Bonan lowered his voice. "There are also some who stayed near the capital region. A few days ago, they were also transferred to the frontier. Now that something has happened to your father, no one in the army is speaking up for him. When I set off to come here, Grand General Li had already led 30,000 troops to the Stone Forest Mountain." Tianyi was stunned. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back and fall onto the small bed, right next to Su Sheng. How could this be? He muttered to himself. Fu Bonan looked at the door of the tent. "That's why I found such an excuse to see you. If someone spied on you, they wouldn't think anything else. I want you to plan ahead of time. Be careful not to die without knowing why." Tianyi was stunned for a while before turning to look at him. "Then little white building. I used to be just a scholar in Jinzhou. When I went to the capital, I had no place to settle down. It was you who first introduced me to your father, so I could settle down." Fu Bonan sighed slightly. "How could I really fall out with you because of a woman? Even the matter about that woman was your father's idea first. I used this as an excuse to pretend to break off relations with you, so that I could have a chance to advance and work for General Tian." Tianyi didn't speak. He didn't know what he was thinking. He didn't speak, so Fu Bonan stayed silent with him. This went on for a full quarter of an hour. Thus, Li Yunqin also knew that Zhao Sheng had stirred up trouble. He really did as he said, and brought black knifing Juran to you. If what Fu Bonan said was true, tens of thousands of armed peasants not only defeated the regular army of you, but also defeated the more powerful Northwest Route army of the neighboring country. It meant that there must be other forces helping. It should be the people from Munanju, right? The Emperor of Yu used to rely on the Sword Palace of Yu. It seemed that the Sword Palace hadn't made a move. In Yu, the only thing that could make them, and the Freemasonry behind them afraid of was Munanju. These guys. He knew these things and wanted to know more about the Emperor of Qing and the Ghost Emperor. But now it seemed that the topic between these two people was getting further and further away from that matter. Thus he planned to use some tricks again. Unexpectedly, Tianyi spoke again. He suddenly changed the topic. "Then what about the thing you wanted to do as an imperial envoy and the Ghost Emperor?" Li Yunqin was slightly surprised. Fu Bonan was even more surprised. A quarter of an hour ago, he had just told Tianyi about his father's important matter. But now he suddenly asked about something else. His expression also gradually calmed down. It seemed that he had gradually recovered from the unexpected panic. Maybe Tianyi was honest and straightforward, but he was born in a family of generals and had seen the world. He was not like ordinary people who would only panic for no reason. Fu Bonan paused for a moment, then sighed. "Ai. Alas, your majesty." He sighed with emotion and then said, "You know, one of my ancestors became a cultivator of Daotong, although it was more than 300 years ago, and he is no longer here. It is said that when he entered the world to cultivate, He went home and left some methods to strengthen the body. I have served in the Ministry of Justice for 2 years, and met His Majesty several times. I even submitted 2 memorials, but I have never received any approval. Until a few days ago. Fu Bonan frowned. A few days ago, I submitted another memorial about the city of Wei. I mentioned that disaster and risked my life to say that it might be related to Daotong. As a result, I was summoned to the palace overnight. At this moment, Fu Bonan looked very sincere. He was like an old friend who had made up with Tianyi and talked about everything, even such things. When I entered the palace, I saw His Majesty and drank wine. It seemed that he was interested and saw my memorial. But he didn't ask me about the memorial, but about my ancestor. Fu Bonan sighed slightly. Maybe it was because I accidentally mentioned it in the memorial. You asked me about my ancestors, and then you asked me about immortality. How would I know anything about immortality? But even so, he talked for a whole night, but never mentioned politics. At dawn, His Majesty asked me to be an imperial envoy, but he didn't want to supervise anything else, but to come to Tongtian Swamp to see if I could have any adventures with all the immortals here. Fu Bonan sighed again and again. Then wouldn't I become a fool? That's not what I want to do. That's why I came here to say something to His Majesty. So I told him about the Ghost Emperor. In the end, he also burned the talisman and replied to me overnight, asking me to find out the truth. Ghost Emperor. Ghost Emperor. Do you believe this kind of thing? I'm afraid that His Majesty is, alas. Oh, since Taoist Qing Shui left the capital a few months ago, His Majesty has become more and more indifferent to the affairs of the court, and more obsessed with alchemy. Yi Tianyi frowned slightly, and listened to him quietly. After thinking for a while, he said, Taoist Qing Shui left the capital? After saying this, he narrowed his eyes again. Alas, when you and I were in the capital, we wanted to secretly see Taoist Qing Shui. It's said that Taoist Qing Shui is beautiful and a fairy. She has lived for hundreds of years without aging or dying, and every generation of emperors. Fu Bonan hurriedly put his finger on his lips. Don't say that. Tianyi suddenly laughed. Why do you believe this? Do you really believe that there is an immortal living in the capital? Fu Bonan didn't know why he mentioned this, but he only said, Of course there are immortals. It's not like we haven't seen cultivators in the capital. As for Yunshan, there are some who have lived for thousands of years. Of course I know this. I mean, do you believe that Taoist Qing Shui in the capital is an immortal? Tianyi snorted coldly. In my opinion, she is just a demoness sent by the evil path to bewitch the emperor. So what do you want me to do? The last sentence took a sudden turn. Fu Bonan was stunned at first, and then asked, You mean now? Tianyi looked at him. Exactly. Fu Bonan thought for a while, stood up and approached him. I think you should go. Go. Go to your father's place. Now the situation is bad beyond repair, and General Tian is powerless to change it. Now if you want to live, there is only one way. Fu Bonan lowered his voice. Lead the troops to the Yu state and join Zhaosheng. General Tian also has the same idea. But he is only worried about you. I came to tell you this news, and ask you to take a detour to the Yu state. When you are out of danger, General Tian will naturally have no one to hold him back, and he can also live. Tianyi was silent for a long time. Isn't that a rebellion? If I leave, won't my father's crime of rebellion be confirmed? Fu Bonan stared at him and shouted in a low voice, Rebellion or death, which one do you choose? You should know that General Li's aunt is Madame Huayang. Who do you think His Majesty favors, and who incites him? Tianyi didn't say anything. After a dozen breaths, when the sunset outside the tent completely disappeared, and the inside of the tent fell into darkness, he slowly got up, took out a match from his bosom, and lit the oil lamp on the small table. Then he approached Fu Bonan with the oil lamp, stared at him for a while and sighed. Alas, I introduced you to my father a few years ago, and my father also appreciates your talent. He recommended you to be a counselor in the Ministry of Justice. Although it is a small position, you don't need to wait for a vacancy. But the civil officials in the court have always been at odds with my father, so they naturally exclude you. So, Tianyi sighed again. You said it was my father who incited you? Fu Bonan frowned in confusion and hesitated for a moment. The next moment, Tian Ye's fist suddenly hit him in the face and knocked him to the ground. Fu Bonan was shocked and was about to struggle to get up, but General Ye's other foot also stepped on his throat, making him roll his eyes and unable to move. Damn bastard, look at what this is! Tian Yi cursed. While cursing, he reached into his bosom and took out a purple talisman, shaking it. Since you know that my family is powerful, look at what this is. Fu Bonan blinked and no longer struggled. He seemed to recognize that thing. Li Yunqin also recognized that thing. It was a purple talisman. This thing was more precious, not only for mortals, but also for cultivators. This meant that it was more difficult for mortals to have it. A talisman that could communicate with people thousands of miles away was also rare in the Xianmen sect, and even rarer in the secular world. 1 or 2 talismans were regarded as treasures by emperors, let alone General Tian. 10 days ago, my father had already told me to beware of villains who would harm me, and he specially mentioned your name. Hee, you didn't expect that my father still cared about you for so many years. Tian Yi spat again. You want me to commit treason, and then accuse my father of colluding with a foreign country? You bastard, you're dreaming. Tell me, who asked you to do such a dirty thing? Chapter 410. After saying this, Tian Yi slightly loosened his foot. Thus, Fu Bonan gasped as if he was suffocating. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to shout, but when he saw Tian Yi pointing at his head with the copper lamp in his hand, he did not shout. Fu Bonan said that Tian Yi used to be nicknamed Jin Tu Nyo, meaning that his family was rich and powerful. But he also acted like a barbaric bull without any regard for the consequences. Killing an imperial envoy in his own tent was not necessarily something he couldn't do. Therefore, he took another deep breath and said, In the fields, everyone has their own master. I've been working in the Ministry of Justice for the past few years, so I've had plenty of opportunities to play dirty tricks. But because of their past relationship, he had never participated in it. As for this time, I had no choice. Who asked me to do such a thing? He took 2 breaths and said, Tian Yi, do I have to say it out loud? Haven't you thought of that? Tian Yi was silent and only stared at him, but he exerted a little more force with his feet. Fu Bonan could only grit his teeth and say, Why are you so stupid? When I told you to run away, I was harming your father, but I was saving you. Would General Li dare to touch your father? Does the left minister dare to touch your father? In the entire Qing kingdom, other than that person, who dares to touch your father? I told you to run because if you run, you can at least keep your life. If you don't run, do you think that person has no other way to deal with you? Tian Ye's eyes widened. Emperor? Fu Bonan sighed in exasperation. Leave quickly. Bullshit. Tian Yi scolded again. Do you think my father is a 3-year-old child who doesn't know that the emperor wants to kill him? Your father wasn't your father a long time ago. Fu Bonan stretched out his hand and punched the ground fiercely. He's already been controlled by demonic arts. Tian Yi was speechless for a while. He did not seem to be shocked, but he did not know how to respond to this absurd and powerless defense. Li Yunqin sighed. What a mess. The demons were in chaos. Shinryu harbored different intentions. Hatred and Zither Kuan harbored different intentions. They wanted to harm the demon kings, demon soldiers and demon generals. Even he himself was not of the same mind as the other dragon son, and had his own plans. Naturally, the celestial sect of wonders was even more chaotic. The 2 saints had already been replaced by the Freemasons, and there were many Freemasons in the Daotong Grotto heaven. As for the remaining sect leaders, some wanted peace, some wanted war, and some didn't want to get involved in the affairs of the world. As for the human allied forces, in the eyes of the demons and the celestial sect of wonders, they were nothing more than background playthings. They couldn't even enter the battlefield. But even among these mortals that the gods and devils didn't care about, there were still many who tried to cheat each other. The matter of sending troops to assist the celestial sect of wonders to eliminate the demons could also contain so many purposes. borrowing the hands of demons to get rid of political enemies and henchmen, old friends plotting against each other due to conflicts of interest, and all sorts of other things. These mortals were insignificant in the eyes of the fiend gods, but they still had their own plans. Everyone felt that they were the main characters, or rather, everyone was trying their best to become the main character and achieve their own goals. The Yi country was like a chessboard. Now the cultivators, fiendish demons, and mortals on the chessboard were all chess pieces. They were mixed together, each with their own thoughts, and formed this chessboard. However, has anyone ever thought about what the purpose of this entire game of chess was, above all these schemes and thoughts, on the level of the overall situation? This was what Li Yunxin wanted to know. Until today, there was still a faint sense of alienation between him and this world. Although this sense of alienation was slowly disappearing, it was enough to make him more aware than ordinary people. Of course, he would also use the same methods as those demons, cultivators, and mortals to achieve his own goals. But his goal had never been for cultivation, for power, or for secret manuals. He actually had a clear goal: to figure out some things in this world that he couldn't understand. For example, cultivation. After dying once and coming to such an unimaginable world, if what he pursued was only power, becoming stronger, and other things that could be done in his previous world, wouldn't it be a waste of this rebirth? In fact, there was one more thing that was also very surprising. That was how he came to this world. However, for Li Yunxin, this matter not only brought him shock, but also a trace of surprise. This surprise came from the fact that he finally knew that a certain rumor in his previous world was not false. In his previous world, there had always been an unsolved case. It was probably in the 1940s of the last century. The country he came from was a large country, and at that time, the national power was declining. A small country in the east grew stronger day by day, and finally launched an all-out war against his country. At that time, the ruling party of his country was called the Nation and Nation Striving Party. There was also a relatively large opposition party called the Common Industry Alliance Party. The two parties cooperated, supplemented by international aid, and after repelling the eastern invaders, a civil war broke out. The civil war finally ended with the victory of the Common Industry Alliance Party, and the Nation and Nation Striving Party retreated to an island in the south of the country. But in the year when the Civil War was about to break out, something happened. A group of huge bombing planes suddenly appeared over the area controlled by the Common Industry Alliance Party and made an emergency landing at the airport. The soldiers of the Communist Army thought it was the enemy country, or the air power of the National Army. And for a moment, they were very frightened, because these planes were too big. They were so big that people could not imagine that these things could actually fly in the sky. At that time, the most advanced aircraft they had was not even 1/5 the length of that plane. Even more frightening was that dozens of such huge aircraft flew all the way from the eastern coast to the inland, but no one noticed them. After a long and difficult negotiation, the military at that time made contact with the commander of the unidentified aircraft. However, the information obtained from the commander made the military think that the other party was just making fun of them, because the other party said they had transmigrated from another world. The other party said that in their world, the history of more than 300 years ago was exactly the same as that of the world Li Yunxin came from. An empire called Ming ruled a vast area and created a brilliant civilization. But like all monarchical empires, this country also began to decline. Under such circumstances, the Ming Empire experienced decades of turmoil and finally underwent a world-shaking transformation. The monarch compromised with the gentry class, ceding most of his power, and entered the constitutional period. After more than 200 years of ups and downs, that empire became the most powerful country in that world. They developed an astonishing technological civilization and created huge war machines. These huge planes called sky fortresses were part of that empire's air force. However, this formation inadvertently deviated from the course of an extremely dangerous combat mission. When they once again made contact with the people of this world, they realized that they had come to a completely unfamiliar world. This world, the world Li Yunxin came from, was half a century behind them. So these soldiers chose to return to the land they were familiar with. But in the land they were familiar with, there were no familiar people. The military of the Common Industry Alliance wanted to believe that this was all nonsense. But the truth was in front of them. The shining behemoths in the distance, the weapons in the hands of those soldiers, were not products of their world. Even the most advanced and powerful country in their world could not have those things. So another long and difficult round of communication began. But this time, the communication did not last long. The civil war between the Common Industry Alliance and the Nation and Nation Striving Party broke out. Both sides threw millions of troops into the war, waging a cruel war on 9.6 million square kilometers of land. At the beginning, the war did not go well. At that time, the leader of the Common Industry Alliance, a leader surnamed Mao, proposed to temporarily put aside the dispute and boldly put the war machines that claimed to be from another world into the war. However, this proposal was opposed by another leader surnamed Zhou. The reason was that the victory of a local battle could hardly affect the overall situation. Moreover, the huge war machines needed to consume fuel and spare parts, which the current technology of their world could not satisfy. The price of throwing them into the battlefield as consumables was too high. If the Common Industry Alliance could win this war, then they would have to face more pressure from other countries. At this time, these things were kept. Once they had the ability to reverse engineer them, they would get more things than now. His opposition was very valuable. At least the leaders at that time thought so. So the batch of huge machines from the other world was sealed, and the secret that later became known as the March 18th incident was also sealed. Until more than 60 years later, the Common Industrial Alliance Party, which had won and seized power, made the country strong again. And in the early 20th century, the development of a lot of cutting-edge technology exploded. It was at this time that the March 18th incident resurfaced. And Li Yunxin knew about this, not through some rumors among the people. There was an old leader. When he was young, he served as a security guard for another older leader. As for the older leader, he had also served as a guard for an even older leader. When the old leader was old, unfortunately, he suffered from Alzheimer's disease. At the beginning, the disease was not serious, but because of the influence of the disease and the mood in his later years, he suffered from mild depression. The treatment for this should not have anything to do with Li Yunxin, but the old leader met Li Yunxin by chance when he went out for a walk. The two of them chatted for a while about some other trivial matters, and Li Yunxin quickly realized that the old man's background was extraordinary, and at that time, he was planning a revenge plan and needed to accumulate some power. Therefore, he used his specialty and quickly made the old man look at him in a different light. From the old man's point of view, this young man was calm, and had the strength of the old man when he was young, a person who could achieve great things. But he did not know that Li Yunxin did not mean it. His calmness was because he did not care at all. Therefore, he quickly became the old man's personal doctor and gained the old man's trust. Finally, when the old man's condition worsened, he accidentally revealed the secret of the March 18th incident to Li Yunxin. The old man did not witness everything at that time, but the old man's former leader's leader was one of the direct witnesses. If the old man said those things when his mind was clear, there would be no doubt. But at that time, his condition was gradually worsening, and Li Yunxin thought that he might have developed some false memories. Nevertheless, this inconceivable event left a deep impression on his mind. Until he came to this world. So he realized that it was true. He transmigrated and existed in another world. It also meant that there was one more thing that was true. The old man once told Li Yunxin that there would be a follow-up to the March 18th incident. Those people on the aircraft once mentioned that there was a theory in their world that could explain any phenomenon in the universe. They also mentioned that the phenomenon of transmigration might be reversible. This meant that Li Yunxin could return to his original world. And Li Yunxin wanted to go back. There was still a debt in that world that had not been settled. If he could not settle that debt, he could not sleep in peace. But he also did not want to go back empty-handed. Right now he had so much power. After experiencing a wonderful and magnificent life in this world, he went to sleep after death. And when he opened his eyes, he found himself back in the world that once belonged to him. This kind of thing was completely unacceptable to him. How could he allow such a powerful force to slip away from his hands? He wanted to go back, and he wanted to go back with all his power. To achieve this goal, he had to uncover the secret of this world. This world was very strange. A certain group of people in this world, the Freemasons, were even stranger. They didn't seem to belong to this world, but there were many of them. Li Yunqin felt that maybe they knew some secrets about how to go back. He needed to uncover these secrets, and at the same time, gain more power for himself. He wanted to stand at the top of this world, enjoy the scenery, and then return to the place where he belonged and finish the unfinished business. These thoughts and all kinds of things in the past flashed through Li Yunqin's mind. While he was hesitating, Tianyi had already retracted his foot from Fu Bonen's neck, but he did not let go of him. He grabbed Fu Bonen's collar with one hand, took out a knife out of nowhere with the other hand, and put the tip of the knife against Fu Bonen's throat. In the end I have to go, right? He laughed coldly. Well, each for his own master. I will kill you first, then we can talk about other things. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.